Hey guys, tonight we're sinking gently yet alarmingly into the surprisingly dramatic world of medicine's most beloved troublemaker, morphine. Yes, the stuff that started as a miracle cure in the 1800s and somehow barreled its way into becoming one of history's most complicated addictions. Before we tuck in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this kind of sleepy historical chaos. And thank you for suggesting this topic, by the way. It was a delightfully unhinged one to explore. While you're here, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Somehow, on this channel, it's always either 11:58 p.m. or 3:17 a.m. Now dim those lights, switch on your fan for that soothing white noise to snuggle into whatever blanket currently has the least crumbs on it, and breathe. Tonight, we're stepping into a world that thought morphine could cure everything. Back pain, morphine. Cough, morphine. Existential dread, morphine. That weird feeling when you stand up too fast, also morphine. But pause for a moment. Have you ever wondered what it actually felt like to live in a century when doctors practically handed out opiates like mints? What was it like being a Civil War soldier whose entire medical plan was don't die and take this vial? How did Victorian mums function while casually sipping morphine-laced syrup between chores? Did people really carry syringes the way we carry water bottles today? And most importantly, how did humanity look at a wildly addictive substance, shrug, and say, yes, this seems perfectly fine? Well, congratulations. You've just woken up at 1805, the year morphine gets discovered. You're groggy, your clothes itch, and your doctor insists he can cure literally anything by handing you something that looks suspiciously like liquid nap time. Good luck. You blink awake in a cluttered 1800s laboratory, where beakers look more like torture devices and every surface is sticky for reasons no one will explain. A young German pharmacist named Friedrich Serturner proudly holds up a crystal he just extracted from opium, morphine. He has no idea he's about to change medicine and ruin future family reunions. Serturner beams at you with the wild-eyed enthusiasm of a man who has not slept in 3 days and considers that a charming personal detail. He gestures around the room like a showman, unveiling the world's most dangerous magic trick. The air smells like scorched alcohol, damp wood, and the unmistakable "I hope this doesn't explode" aroma that follows amateur chemistry everywhere. You instinctively take a step back, not because you're scared, but because something sticky on the floor just made a sound that rugs shouldn't normally make. "Look," he says, lifting the crystal closer to your face. It glitters like a villain's tooth. You nod politely while wondering whether you should be inhaling fumes in here without hazard pay. Up until now, opium has been a chaotic multi-tool, soothing pain, quieting nerves, stopping coughing, and occasionally destroying entire civilizations. Serturner, however, believes there's something pure inside it, something he can isolate, something controllable, which is adorable, considering opium has never been described as controllable by anyone ever. He proudly tells you he named his discovery Morphium after Morpheus, the Greek god of dreams. Romantic, yes. Accurate, painfully so. You can practically feel the future medical world screaming in both excitement and foreshadowing. Morphine will soon be marketed as the safer, more scientific answer to opium addiction. A bold claim that will age about as well as unrefrigerated milk. But right now, in this cramped laboratory, Serturner is convinced he's on the verge of greatness. He demonstrates his extraction process, which involves heating things, cooling things, dissolving things, and occasionally holding a beaker up to the window like he's waiting for a sign from heaven. You watch him swirl liquids that look suspiciously brown, and not the fun tea-time brown, but the ominous "this came from a questionable drainpipe" brown. Then, with the confidence of a man who has never heard of double-blind studies, Sir Turner announces that the best way to test this new substance is on himself. Of course it is. This is the 1800s. You brace yourself as he measures out a dose with the precision of a toddler pouring juice. He takes it. He waits. And then, slowly, he relaxes into a dreamy haze that could either mean scientific success or mild poisoning. Hard to say. You glance at his notebook, which contains several entries like feeling pleasantly calm and slight nausea, probably unrelated, followed by tested again today purely for research. Ah yes, a scientific method. Soon, Sir Turner begins recruiting volunteers from the local town to test morphine's effects. This naturally results in people wandering around extremely relaxed, while insisting their aches, pains, and existential dread have evaporated. What no one notices is how quickly they develop a fondness, a deep spiritual attachment to morphine. It's like they've discovered the emotional equivalent of a soft blanket and refuse to give it back. Word spreads. Doctors perk up. Pharmacists lean in. Suddenly, this sticky little laboratory becomes the birthplace of modern pain relief. Sir Turner publishes his findings, declaring morphine to be a medical miracle that will surely replace opium entirely. You nod supportively, even though you can already sense that future historians are sharpening their pencils with ominous delight. And yet, in this moment, it is miraculous. For the first time, pain could be targeted and tamed. For the first time, medicine had a tool powerful enough to quiet the suffering that defined so much of 19th century life. You watch Sir Turner scribble the word breakthrough in his journal with a triumphant flourish. He doesn't know, how could he, that his tiny shimmering crystals will ignite both hope and devastation, that soldiers, mothers, doctors, and entire nations will depend on them. That addiction will spread quietly through bedrooms, hospitals, and battlefields. Right now, he's just a proud chemist holding a crystal that glows faintly in the afternoon sun. And you're standing beside him, ankle deep in mysterious laboratory stickiness, witnessing the exact moment history takes a very dreamy, very complicated turn. Before morphine strutted onto the scene, opium was the reigning queen of fixing everything badly. You find yourself in a world where people drink opium tinctures like herbal tea, unaware that this warm, soothing remedy is also quietly rearranging their entire personality. You open your eyes in a bustling apothecary, shelves lined with little glass bottles filled with liquids so mysterious they should come with their own ominous soundtracks. The room smells faintly of licorice, smoke, and that particular type of mustiness that suggests no one has washed the walls since the French Revolution. A harried shopkeeper rushes past you holding 3 bottles of laudanum, the Beyoncé of opium products, because apparently half the town is having nervous trouble today. Opium in this era is less of a drug and more of a lifestyle. Everyone uses it. Grandparents, parents, toddlers. That one neighbour who insists mercury cures baldness. You watch a young mother stir a generous spoonful of laudanum into her tea with the same casualness you use when adding honey. She nods at you cheerfully, completely unaware that the syrup she's using to survive motherhood is also turning her dreams into interpretive dance routines performed by floating Victorian furniture. Outside, the world is noisy. Horses clopping, street vendors yelling, mysterious carts carrying suspicious barrels. But inside the apothecary, everything feels comfortably muffled, like someone turned the emotional volume knob down to a peaceful hum. Several customers sit in a corner, staring into the middle distance with the contented faces of people who have just temporarily postponed all their problems to a future version of themselves. Opium's superpower is simple. It works. Pain, gone. Coughing, silenced. Anxiety, shoved firmly into a closet with a blanket over its head. The downside, though, is that opium does not believe in moderation. It's like that friend who can be charming in small doses, but absolutely destructive if you spend a full weekend together. Take a little, and you might write poetry. Take a lot, and suddenly you're convinced the wallpaper is whispering financial advice to you. Doctors, for their part, are thrilled. Medical science in the early 1800s is a rough collection of guesswork, bleeding people, and hoping for the best. Opium is the first thing that consistently makes patients feel better instead of worse, so physicians prescribe it with the enthusiasm of someone discovering cheat codes for life. Their medical logic is simple. If a little helps, more must help a lot. You wander through town and see opium everywhere. A baker pours it into a tonic for digestive vigour. A reverend quietly sips it for spiritual clarity, which is Victorian for I haven't slept since Easter. Children receive it for teething, which is a bold choice considering they already lack impulse control. Even poets, who arguably need no chemical assistance to become dramatic, consume enough laudanum to power an entire season of gloomy literature. Opium dens appear, tucked away in dim corners of growing cities. Inside, people recline on cushions, drifting into serene detachment like overworked adults melting into a couch after a long day. You sit among them for a moment, listening to soft murmured conversations that fade into dreamy half-sentences. Everything feels slow, warm, and faintly suspicious. But beneath this peaceful haze, something darker simmers. People begin needing more and more opium to achieve the same calm. They notice their bodies craving it, whispering subtle bribes of just one more dose whenever the day gets difficult, which in the 1800s is every day. Merchants sell it, doctors prescribe it, households hoard it, and slowly, without any public health warnings, society develops an addiction problem so large you could store it in a warehouse. Still, no one questions it, not yet. Because when the alternative is untreated pain, emotional turmoil, anxiety, and the general misery of pre-modern life, opium feels like a miracle, an elegant fix for a messy world. You step back into the apothecary one last time. The shopkeeper hands you a small bottle, smiling warmly, unaware he's offering both comfort and chaos in equal measure. And as the bell over the door jingles softly, you realise you're standing in the calm eye of a storm that the world won't recognise until much, much later. You're sitting in a doctor's office that smells faintly of whiskey and poor decisions. On the shelf is laudanum, opium pills, mysterious syrups, and a medical handbook that's basically a list of diseases followed by the words "give opium again." The room itself looks less like a professional medical space and more like someone's attic that's trying its best. A rickety wooden desk leans at a 20-degree angle, covered in loose papers stained with something that might be ink or might be blood. A human skull sits in the corner, not for scientific purposes, but because the doctor thought it added ambience. Sunlight filters through a grimy window, illuminating floating dust motes that absolutely should not be inhaled. Your doctor finally strolls in, wiping his hands on a towel that has seen too many things. He squints at you, not because he's evaluating your condition, but because the concept of prescription glasses won't be invented for a while. He asks what's wrong, and before you even finish the sentence, he nods sagely and reaches for the laudanum bottle like a man greeting an old friend. This is early 19th century medicine. Opiates are the hammer, and every problem, physical, emotional, or existential, is a nail. Headache, opiates, stomach pain, opiates, a cough, opiates, marriage stress, definitely opiates. The doctor gives you a sympathetic smile that suggests he has never once questioned whether drinking pure opium mixed with alcohol is a long-term solution. He flips open his medical handbook, which contains detailed instructions like give tincture of opium and for fevers, increase the opium. One section simply says, for ailments of unknown origin, administer laudanum until patient improves or becomes too sleepy to complain. you begin to understand why average life expectancy in this era is equivalent to modern-day cat years. As he rummages through his cabinet, you get a better look at the tools of the trade. There are saws for amputations, smelling salts for fainting, jars of leeches for anything involving blood, and several vials containing substances with names like Dr. Pennington's Instant Relief Elixir, which is 95% alcohol, 4% opium, and 1% optimism. The doctor explains that opiates are considered a breakthrough, precise, controllable, modern, compared to earlier treatments like bloodletting, prayer, or simply hoping your illness gets bored and leaves. Opium seems like a gift from the heavens. Never mind that patients frequently return complaining that stopping the medicine gives them unpleasant feelings like panic, despair, and wanting to crawl into the walls. The doctor pats those patients on the shoulder and writes bigger doses. Boom. Science. You watch as a young woman enters, coughing from what sounds suspiciously like tuberculosis. The doctor listens to her chest for 3 seconds, nods gravely, and hands her a bottle of laudanum the size of a wine flask. Take a sip whenever the coughing troubles you, he instructs, or whenever the day troubles you, or whenever you remember you own it. She thanks him and floats back out the door, already looking like she's forgotten what year it is. Next comes an older man with chronic joint pain. The doctor doesn't even ask questions, he just slaps 2 opium pills into the man's hand like he's dealing cards. The man beams with gratitude. This is the best part of early opiate prescribing. Everyone thinks it's working perfectly. No one notices the growing dependency because everyone is too relaxed to care. Then there's the emotional side of things. Early doctors treat grief, heartbreak, boredom, and general feminine agitation all with the same cure, opium. You watch as a mother mourning the loss of a child leaves with a bottle meant to soothe the nerves, and suddenly you understand how entire communities drift gently into psychological cotton candy. When you finally stand to leave, the doctor hands you a small vial just in case. For what? He doesn't say. You suspect the answer is everything. The bottle is warm in your hand, amber liquid swirling like a tiny sunset. You step outside into the busy street, realizing you've just witnessed the moment in history when medicine, hope, and catastrophic overconfidence collided. Early doctors meant well, truly. They were doing the best they could with the tools they had, and unfortunately, one of those tools was extremely addictive poppy juice. You walk away feeling oddly calm, slightly concerned, and deeply aware that the medical profession simply shrugged and said, "Sure, why not?" The moment morphine enters the chat, doctors become obsessed. You're handed a tiny vial and told it works like opium, but better, stronger, purer, and absolutely not addictive. Spoiler, the 1800s are wrong about a lot of things. You hold the vial up to the light, watching the liquid swirl like it's plotting something. It looks harmless, almost elegant, with the faint amber tint of a fancy dessert wine. But doctors gather around you with the excitement of children at a birthday party, insisting this is the future of medicine. The future they envision is calm, painless, and filled with grateful patients writing thank you letters. The future you envision includes several lawsuits that haven't been invented yet. A doctor in a wool waistcoat pats you on the shoulder and whispers, "It's perfectly safe." He has the expression of someone who has never been correct about anything quietly dangerous. In the 1800s, scientific confidence is less about research and more about vibes. And the vibe here is, we definitely didn't test this enough, but it seems promising, so let's give it to literally everyone. You watch as morphine spreads through medical circles faster than gossip in a small town. Doctors prescribe it for chronic pain, acute pain, emotional pain, and the pain of being alive in an era before antibiotics. If someone sneezes too loudly, a doctor nearby reaches for the morphine vial like a reflex. Soon, you're ushered into a hospital ward. where patients lie on stiff beds that could easily double as ironing boards. A nurse gently injects morphine into a man with a broken leg, and instantly his face softens into something resembling blissful apathy. He waves his free hand in your direction, murmuring something about hearing colours. The nurse writes down, improved in her logbook, "Doctors are thrilled." For centuries, surgery has involved 3 ingredients: a saw, a bottle of whiskey, and prayer. Now, suddenly, there's a substance that reduces agony without knocking people unconscious or turning them into screaming blurs. Surgeons practically swoon. Finally, they think, a painkiller worthy of the scientific age. Never mind that the scientific age also includes phrenology, seances, and arsenic wallpaper. As you move through the ward, the air grows thick with gratitude and mild hallucinations. Patients describe morphine as a heavenly drifting sensation, a gentle floating away from the misery of their broken bones and infected wounds. You hear someone refer to it as God's tea. Another man calls it the warm blanket of the soul. One woman simply smiles at the ceiling and whispers, "I think my spine is humming." But there's something else you notice, something subtle. A few patients ask the doctors when they'll receive their next dose, even though they just had one an hour ago. A soldier recovering from a bullet wound clutches his empty syringe with the same intensity a modern person reserves for their smartphone charger. A mother being treated for nerve pain looks relieved when the doctor enters, not because she feels worse, but because she wants another vial just in case. These tiny warning signs bounce off the doctors like pebbles thrown at a brick wall. Physicians insist morphine is safe because it's isolated, pure, and scientific. They appreciate its precision, its predictability, its ability to transform agony into tranquility. In their minds, purity equals safety, and safety equals let's prescribe this forever. You linger near a desk where a young medical student writes glowing notes in a journal. Morphine, he writes, may replace opium entirely. No more dependency, no more risk. The ink is still wet when a patient nearby quietly asks if the student has any extra. The student doesn't think twice. He happily hands the man another dose, proud of his generosity. You step outside into the brisk air, trying to shake the feeling that you've just witnessed the start of something enormous. Behind you, the hospital glows with soft lantern light, each room filled with drifting, drowsy patients who genuinely believe they found relief without consequences. Morphine truly is a scientific marvel, transformational, groundbreaking, miraculous. But as you walk away, the tiny vial in your hand feels heavier than it should, like it knows the world isn't entirely ready for what's inside. And frankly, neither are you. You're suddenly knee-deep in mud next to a French soldier who's just been handed morphine for battlefield pain. Surgeons cheer. Soldiers relax. Absolutely no one asks if this might cause problems later. The world around you is chaos. Cannon fire rumbling like distant thunder, muskets cracking through the air, drums beating an uneven heartbeat for an army that has not slept properly since last harvest. Smoke hangs low over the battlefield like a gloomy chandelier. You take one step and immediately regret it. The mud here is not just mud. It feels sentient. It grabs your boots with enthusiasm, slurping like it's trying to drag you into a soft, earthy grave. Beside you, the French soldier exhales a dreamy sigh as the morphine kicks in. His face shifts from "I've been shot in the leg" to "I'm floating gently toward a warm baguette." Around you, other wounded soldiers are being carried to a makeshift field hospital, a tent held together by rope, hope, and the sheer willpower of 3 exhausted surgeons who look like they've already lived through 4 wars this morning. Inside the tent, the air is thick with the smell of sweat, smoke, blood, and whatever someone was cooking before the kitchen exploded. Surgeons rush about with the frantic determination of people who know their job is terrible, but also historically important. One of them sees the soldier you've escorted and immediately shouts, "Give him morphine, quickly." You watch as they prepare a dose with the precision of someone seasoning a stew, loosely, confidently, and with absolutely no measuring tools. The syringe slides into the soldier's arm. His muscles relax. His breathing evens. His eyes glaze over with the blissful expression of a man who has transcended earthly concerns. A cannon fires in the distance, and he giggles. The surgeon pats your arm proudly. "A miracle drug," he declares, as if he personally invented it. Pain, poof. He makes a dramatic disappearing gesture with both hands. Pain does poof. Everywhere you look, wounded men are suddenly serene. One soldier with a bayonet wound starts humming a lullaby. Another calmly informs the doctor that he can now see the future, and it involves winning the war and also a very large horse. Every time a man sighs contentedly, a surgeon beams like a parent at a school recital. Of course, battlefield surgery in the Napoleonic era is not glamorous. Amputations happen every few minutes. Bones crack. Sawdust mixes with blood. The surgeon's apron resembles a crime scene. But now, with morphine, the screaming has quieted to murmured confusion and slightly philosophical mumbling. One man politely asks whether his missing arm will be returned to him later, like a misplaced coat. You stand near the supply table, which consists of 3 bottles of morphine, an alarming collection of saws, and a stack of rags pretending to be bandages. The doctors use morphine so liberally that you begin to suspect they think it can also fix horses, cannons, and maybe geopolitical tensions. A soldier limps up with a twisted ankle and receives the same enthusiastic dose as someone losing a leg. The surgeons are euphoric. To them, morphine is divine intervention. Before this, battlefield medicine was mostly about holding men down and praying. Now, men drift peacefully into surgery like they're settling into an overstuffed armchair. No one, not a single person in this tent, stops to question whether giving highly addictive opiates to thousands of traumatized soldiers might result in long-term issues. They're too grateful that the screaming has stopped. Outside, the war rages on, but inside the tent, everything feels strangely calm, like a chaotic spa day with more amputations. You step back out into the muddy field, hearing surgeons cheer every time a patient slips into painless bliss. A French officer trots by on horseback shouting orders, unaware his men are currently too relaxed to hear them, and as the sky darkens with smoke, you realize something important. Morphine's debut performance is a smashing success, truly groundbreaking, a medical marvel. It is also quietly the beginning of a massive problem that no one in this century is prepared for. But that, of course, is a future historian's headache. Right now, everyone is just thrilled the soldiers have stopped screaming. Meet ordinary citizens of the early 19th century who begin taking morphine for simple aches and wake up 6 months later wondering why their personality feels like a wet sock. You find yourself drifting down a cobblestone street lined with tidy homes, each boasting cheerful windows and suspicious amounts of lace. Birds chirp, horses clip-clop, and behind nearly every door sits someone who, at this very moment, is taking a perfectly safe dose of morphine for something as harmless as a headache, a sprained wrist, or an especially disappointing soup. You enter the home of a seamstress named Marguerite. She started taking morphine after stabbing her fingertip one too many times while hemming her 10th dress of the day. At first, her doctor gave her a few drops to take the edge off. She was delighted. Her finger stopped throbbing. Her mood lifted. She suddenly didn't care that she'd been sewing non-stop for 9 hours. Magical. A week later, she's pouring herself slightly larger doses just to stay ahead of the pain, the way someone today might preheat a pan before actually cooking anything. Now, 6 months later, Marguerite is floating through life like a polite ghost. She forgets conversations mid-sentence. misplaces scissors in truly alarming locations, and emotionally reacts to everything with the same mild interest one gives to dust floating in sunlight. Her friends whisper that she's become very calm, which is Victorian for deeply concerning, but no one is connecting the dots yet. Across town lives Mr. Heinrich Müller, a clerk who started taking morphine after a back spasm. He swears he's fine, just a bit tired these days. In reality, Heinrich now structures his entire day around making sure he never runs out. He keeps doses tucked into drawers, coat pockets, kitchen shelves, and one decorative sugar bowl that no longer contains sugar. When his supply gets low, he becomes anxious in a way he describes as a touch of nerves, but which looks suspiciously like pacing the hallway while muttering to his boots. Then there's Elise, a young mother of 2. Her doctor prescribed morphine for women's troubles, which covers roughly 97% of things that could happen to a woman in the 1800s. At first, Elise loved the peace it brought. The screaming children, muffled, the laundry, marginally less hateful, her husband's loud chewing, practically background noise. But slowly the sweetness faded. She needs more to feel the same calm. The walk to the apothecary becomes her favourite part of the week. She says it's for the fresh air. You know better. You move from house to house, observing the same pattern. Repeat like a quiet, tragic waltz. People take morphine to function, then take morphine because they cannot function without it. Nobody questions this because the idea of addiction does not exist yet in any meaningful way. Doctors believe morphine is safe. Patients believe doctors. Society believes anything written in fancy cursive handwriting. A few physicians begin to notice that some patients keep returning for refills long after their injuries heal. These doctors scratch their heads, stroke their beards, and conclude the issue must be weak nerves or melancholic temperament, because the alternative, that morphine might be causing the problem, is unthinkable. One doctor even suggests these patients simply lack self-control, which is hilarious considering he personally drinks laudanum every night to help him sleep. Meanwhile, patients spiral quietly. Some feel restless without morphine. Others become irritable, foggy or sleepless. A few suffer terrifying withdrawal symptoms, which they describe as ill humour, spiritual unease, or the sense that my bones are arguing. Every one of them assumes these effects mean they need more morphine, not that they should stop taking it. And why would they suspect anything? The drug is prescribed by trained professionals, sold in every apothecary, advertised as safe, and praised for relieving pain. To most people, morphine is a miracle. They don't feel addicted, they feel attached. They don't feel dependent, they feel comforted. You watch as Heinrich takes his evening dose, smiling faintly as the world softens around him. Marguerite hums while sewing, drifting in and out of awareness like a lantern running low on oil. Elise tucks her children into bed and then reaches for her bottle, telling herself she deserves a moment of peace. They are the first wave of a crisis no one can name yet. Ordinary people unknowingly swept into the undertow of a drug more powerful than anything society has ever encountered. And as night settles over the quiet streets, you feel a chill of recognition. Humanity has just stepped onto a slope far more slippery than anyone realizes. Welcome to 1853, where 2 men invent a syringe and unintentionally turbocharge morphine addiction. Suddenly, you're watching Victorians inject themselves with the confidence of people who definitely shouldn't be trusted with needles. You arrive in a tidy Victorian parlour where everything is upholstered, over-decorated and wildly flammable. Lace curtains billow next to candles. Someone's taxidermied bird stares at you from a mantel. And in the centre of this politely chaotic world stand Dr. Alexander Wood and Charles Prevaz, 2 men whose combined enthusiasm for new medical gadgets could power an entire steampunk convention. They proudly unveil their creation, a slender, gleaming metal syringe with a needle so sharp it practically hums. The idea is revolutionary. Instead of swallowing morphine, which takes a while, or drinking laudanum, which takes even longer, you can now deliver the drug directly into the body. Faster relief, faster calm, faster, well, everything. Doctor. Wood explains that injecting morphine will treat neuralgia by targeting the nerves. He gestures excitedly at diagrams of human anatomy that are either deeply inaccurate or printed upside down. Charles Pravas nods solemnly, as if this invention is destined to cure the world of all suffering. Neither of them seems aware that they've opened a portal to centuries of questionable medical decision-making. You watch as Wood fills the syringe with a clear liquid and approaches his first patient, his wife. She suffers from chronic pain, and he believes this new delivery method will be life-changing. He injects a small dose into her arm. She leans back, sighs, and announces she feels wonderful. Wood beams. Science triumphs. The audience applauds. Someone faints out of excitement. But then the trouble begins. Other doctors catch wind of this miraculous device and immediately decide that more people need syringes. Within months, surgeons, apothecaries, and overly confident hobbyists begin distributing them like party favours. Victorian households that used to store tea sets now keep polished syringe kits next to the biscuits. You walk through a fashionable neighbourhood and see a man in a perfectly tailored suit, rolling up his sleeve on a park bench, preparing to inject morphine with the nonchalant grace of someone lighting a cigarette. Nearby, a woman with an umbrella and immaculate posture discreetly does the same, shielding her arm with the poise of a duchess avoiding gossip. The syringe introduces a new problem no one is prepared for: accuracy. Victorians, for all their elegance, have absolutely no idea how to measure proper doses. Some inject tiny, ineffective amounts. Others, far more enthusiastic, go for doses that would make modern doctors scream. The learning curve is steep and filled with fainting spells, sudden euphoria, and occasional philosophical revelations that absolutely no one asked for. Doctors notice something unsettling. Patients are returning more frequently. Not for checkups, no. They're returning because the relief is too good, too instant, too tempting. Injection bypasses the slow digestion process entirely. The high is immediate. Too immediate. One physician writes, patients appear rather eager for repeat doses. Another speculates that perhaps the injection method itself is most agreeable to the nervous constitution. A third says nothing, because he's busy injecting himself for research. Meanwhile, addiction cases begin to skyrocket. People who once used morphine occasionally now inject multiple times a day. They hide syringes in coat linings, under mattresses, in hat boxes. The new phrase whispered in refined Victorian hallways isn't scandal about a lover, it's concern that someone is taking the injections. The worst part? No one recognises this as addiction yet. The blame is placed everywhere except the morphine. Doctors blame weak moral character. Families blame stress. Newspapers blame modern living. A pastor blames the decline of proper Sabbath observance. The syringe is seen as a saviour, even as it quietly rewires the entire relationship between pain, comfort, and dependence. You stand in a dimly lit room, watching a man inject morphine before bed, tucking the syringe into a velvet case that looks disturbingly luxurious. His breathing slows, his eyes flutter. For a moment he looks peaceful, too peaceful. The quiet that settles over the room is soft, gentle, and deeply foreboding. Because with one invention, the world has entered a new era. An era where pain relief is powerful, instantaneous, and dangerously easy. An era where dependence spreads faster than anyone understands. An era where a tiny metal needle will reshape the history of medicine, addiction, and human behaviour. And you're standing at ground zero, watching Victorian society stab itself in the arm with stunning confidence. You open a dainty velvet box thinking it contains perfume. Nope, it's a morphine syringe kit marketed to housewives for headaches, nerves, and the unbearable stress of your cousin visiting. The kit lies nestled in satin like a prize necklace, gleaming under the gentle glow of a nearby oil lamp. The box smells faintly of lavender and denial. Beside the syringe sits a small vial of morphine labelled in elegant cursive, promising tranquility, grace, and the kind of emotional stability no actual Victorian household has ever achieved. There's even a tiny instruction booklet decorated with floral engravings, as if soft botanical drawings will distract from the fact that you are absolutely holding medical-grade equipment. You glance around the parlour. Every surface has doilies. Every chair has lace. Every bookshelf leans under the weight of too many moral instruction manuals. And on one table, beautifully arranged between a vase of lilies and a bowl of hard candy, sits yet another syringe kit. Because in this era, self-care isn't hot tea and a nap, it's morphine by candlelight. The marketing behind these kits is genius and absolutely reckless. Ads in newspapers and women's magazines portray respectable ladies injecting themselves with serene smiles, their hair arranged in elaborate curls that suggest morphine is also a styling product. One illustration shows a woman reclining on a chaise lounge, her hand delicately poised with a syringe, accompanied by the caption, "For the restoration of feminine calm." Another claims it helps women maintain household excellence, which sounds suspiciously like stay quiet while the men debate steam engines again. You watch as the lady of the house enters the room. Her dress rustles like a paper bag full of secrets. She sighs dramatically, removes her gloves, and opens the velvet box with practiced familiarity. "Just a little," she murmurs, as though modern historians are not standing nearby ready to burst into horrified tears. She draws a small amount into the syringe, taps it gently like she's seen doctors do, and injects herself with the confidence of someone who once accidentally set her curtains on fire and decided that wasn't a big deal either. Within moments, her posture softens, her eyelids flutter. Her entire personality melts into something resembling warm pudding. She leans back, blissful and unbothered by the cacophony of life. Children thumping upstairs, her husband loudly mispronouncing French words, and a neighbour's horse refusing to leave their garden again. This, of course, is exactly how the addiction problem deepens. The kits make morphine feel elegant, controlled, and, most dangerously, normal. Women begin using it not only for physical pain, but for everything. Stress, boredom, loneliness, looming social obligations, and the emotional burden of navigating a world where fainting couches are considered medical equipment. You follow your hostess through a typical day, observing how frequently she turns to the velvet box. Morning headache, a small dose, midday slump, another. Cousin Beatrice stops by unannounced, a double. At this point her bloodstream could run a successful apothecary of its own, and she is far from alone. Across town, women gather for afternoon tea, discussing school fees, neighbourhood gossip, and their preferred injection techniques. Some brag about barely feeling the needle anymore. One woman pulls a syringe kit from her handbag as casually as pulling out a handkerchief. "I simply couldn't get through Wednesday without it," she sighs, sipping her tea. Doctors notice the trend and pretend to be concerned for approximately 3 days before deciding that, if their patients are calm and not screaming about migraines, all is well. After all, if morphine is scientific and pure, what harm could possibly come from handing out needles to people who store kitchen knives directly beside their toddlers? But beneath the polished surface, the lace, the manners, the polite laughter, there's an undercurrent of dependence forming. You see it in the way the women guard their kits, the way their eyes flick toward the velvet box whenever stress rises, the way an afternoon without morphine feels unthinkable. This is Victorian self-care at its most dramatic, refined, elegant, and deeply dangerous. These little velvet boxes promise peace, but quietly invite chaos, and as you close the lid, satin rustling softly beneath your fingers, you realize you're holding not just a household accessory, but one of the most effective addiction delivery systems ever marketed to polite society. You find yourself staring at a bottle of quietness syrup for teething babies. Spoiler, it's morphine. Victorian parents nod approvingly as their toddlers are gently sedated into next Tuesday. The label is decorated with cherubs and flowers, as if morphine becomes less dangerous when paired with aggressive whimsy. Beneath the pastel artwork, tiny print promises that this syrup soothes teething, fussiness, infantile distress, and, most tellingly, household inconvenience. You turn the bottle over in your hands, realizing that Victorian marketing wasn't even pretending. This wasn't medicine, it was parental self-defense. A mother bustles past you, balancing a baby who's loudly expressing his disappointment with reality. She pours a small spoonful of the syrup with the calm efficiency of someone seasoning soup. The child swallows, squawks once, then immediately goes limp like a pillow that's given up. The mother exhales a deep sigh of relief. Finally she whispers, as if the baby has chosen serenity instead of being chemically launched into dreamland. You follow her into the sitting room, where several other women have gathered for tea. Their children, tiny, drooling, vaguely decorative, are sprawled in bassinets, blissfully unconscious. One infant, arms splayed dramatically, looks like he's posing for a Renaissance painting titled Baby Experiencing Transcendence. The women sip their tea and discuss knitting patterns, church gossip, and the subtle art of sedating small humans. You try to picture this scene in any modern parenting group. Today's mothers debate gluten, organic snacks, and whether BPA-free bottles are truly safe. Victorian mothers, meanwhile, casually administer narcotics to their infants and call it good mothering. If time travellers ever meet, there will be questions. You pick up a pamphlet left on the table, Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup, promising absolutely harmless relief for children and peaceful nights for parents. Harmless, a word doing a lot of heavy lifting for a bottle containing morphine, alcohol, and enough false confidence to power a fleet of steamships. In another home, you observe a father attempting to calm a toddler who is currently performing an opera of rage. The father, already exhausted from a 14-hour workday in a world without labour laws, hands the child a teaspoon of syrup with the desperation of someone trying to defuse a bomb using only intuition and hope. 2 minutes later, the toddler melts into sleep, drooling gently on his own shirt. The father nods proudly. Problem solved. Except, of course, it isn't. Behind the scenes, babies begin developing alarming symptoms: limpness, breathing irregularities, and withdrawal episodes that Victorian doctors describe with scientific precision as mysterious infant agitation. Rather than blaming the literal narcotic being spoon-fed to newborns, the medical community suggests the children have delicate constitutions, which, yes, is true, but perhaps not the core issue here. You visit a local apothecary where the clerk cheerfully recommends soothing syrup to every customer, including a grandmother shopping for a christening gift. Helps with colic, he chirps, and with long carriage rides, and with the baby being awake. He says this last line with a weary smile shared by parents across all eras. What's heartbreaking is how logical it all seems within the context of the 1800s. Infant mortality is high. Parents are overwhelmed. Medical knowledge is a chaotic soup. Opium and morphine are the best tools society has to reduce suffering, or at least reduce noise. These parents aren't malicious. They're desperate, exhausted, and fully trusting of doctors who themselves barely understand what kidney does. You step back and watch the quiet nursery, the peaceful babies, the parents finally relaxing for the first time that week. The room is serene, warm, and profoundly unsettling, because beneath that calm lies a truth history will eventually confront. This was not soothing. This was sedation. A whole generation of infants drifted through early childhood in a soft narcotic haze, their parents lovingly administering something they never knew could harm them. As you close the bottle of quietness syrup, its cork fitting with a soft pop, you can't help but feel the gentle ache of hindsight. The Victorian era loved solutions, especially quick ones, and nothing felt quicker than morphine. You're in a military tent surrounded by groaning soldiers. The doctors rush by yelling, "Morphine! More morphine!" As amputations proceed with disturbing enthusiasm. No one, absolutely no one, is tracking doses. The air is thick with the iron smell of blood and the hot, damp heaviness of too many bodies packed into a canvas oven. The ground beneath your feet is an unholy stew of mud, sawdust and fluids you refuse to identify. Outside, the thunder of cannons shakes the earth, but inside, the louder noise is the relentless chorus of pain until morphine starts flowing like holy water at a revival. A surgeon barrels past you, wiping his hands on an apron so stained it could double as battlefield camouflage. He grabs a syringe, fills it generously, scientific measurement be damned, and plunges it into the nearest soldier's arm. The man jolts, then sighs with the relief of someone discovering indoor plumbing for the first time. The surgeon grins triumphantly as if morphine is his own personal invention. War medicine has always been rough, but during the Civil War it's a grim assembly line. Assess wound, administer morphine, remove limb, repeat. Surgeons work with terrifying speed, sawing through bone like they're settling a personal vendetta. Their mantra is simple: keep them alive long enough to stop screaming. And morphine, dear, sweet morphine, is the only reason some soldiers make it through the saw. You watch a doctor pull aside a young man whose leg is barely hanging on. The soldier trembles, teeth clenched, until a syringe enters his arm. Within seconds, he relaxes so visibly you half expect him to request a pillow and a bedtime story. The surgical team gets to work, removing the leg with the practiced efficiency of people slicing a holiday roast. The patient mumbles something about floating above a river. "Good," the surgeon says. "Stay there." Across the tent, a nurse rummages through dwindling supplies, desperate to find another vial. "We're running low," she calls. The doctor doesn't even look up. "Check the other crate," he shouts, the tone of a man who has not slept in 4 days and does not intend to start now. You watch her lift a box and spill out enough morphine to supply a small population. The relief on her face is almost comical. Nobody, not the surgeons, not the nurses, not the quartermasters, is keeping track of how much morphine each soldier receives. A man with a shoulder wound might get the same amount as a man with 3 missing limbs. Another soldier, panicking as musket fire crackles outside, is given morphine just to calm down. In the frenzy of war, morphine isn't just a painkiller. It's a sedation tool, an emotional cushion, a psychological flotation device. The unintended consequence appears quickly. Soldiers grow attached to the blissful numbness. Who wouldn't? Morphine lifts them from agony, fear, and shock. It smooths the sharp edges of reality until the battlefield feels very far away. When the pain inevitably returns, they ask for more, then demand more, then quietly beg for it, eyes wide, hands shaking. A sergeant limps into the tent asking if he can get a top off. He gestures at his bandaged arm. The surgeon waves him over without even checking the wound. Another dose, another sigh, another soldier drifting away from the nightmare around him. You move to the recovery area where rows of men lie on stretchers, breathing in unison like a strange sleeping choir. Some mutter nonsense. Others stare at the ceiling with peaceful resignation. A few clutch the air as though holding phantom weapons. One whispers to you, "Did we win?" Even though the battle is still raging outside, these men will soon return home, alive, but changed. Many will carry physical scars, others will carry something less visible, a dependence on the drug that helped them survive. What the surgeons call a miracle, the soldiers will learn to call a necessity. Their bodies, accustomed to morphine's warm embrace, will demand it long after the war is over. And because no one recorded doses, nobody realizes how many men are quietly walking out of the war addicted. A cannon booms in the distance. The tent shakes. The surgeons shout for more morphine. The cycle begins again. You step outside, the cool air hitting your face like a reset button. Behind you, the tent glows with lantern light, an eerie sanctuary where suffering is dulled at extraordinary cost. Morphine was the hero of the battlefield. It was also the hidden villain of the aftermath, and nobody, in the chaos of war, could see what was coming. Civil War veterans come home injured and unknowingly addicted. You watch them navigate daily life while their doctors shrug and say, must be nerves. You follow a train of weary men stepping off a platform, uniforms tattered, limbs missing, eyes distant. Their bodies survived the battlefield, but their minds, their cravings, those they carried home like invisible wounds. These men were the first to be treated with large repeated doses of morphine in a war where no one kept records, measured carefully, or said, "Hey, maybe we're creating a nationwide chemical problem." The veterans limp into towns where church bells ring, families cheer, and women wave handkerchiefs with tearful joy. The celebration is warm, emotional, full of relief, but you notice something else as you walk among them. Twitching hands, restless feet, eyes scanning for something unsaid, like they're searching for the battlefield's only good memory, the one that came in a syringe. You visit the home of Private Samuel Whitaker, who returned with a leg wound and a charming personality that now short-circuits without morphine. In the war, the drug dulled his agony. At home, the pain is still real, but the longing is even stronger. He tells his doctor he feels jittery, sick, panicked, unable to sleep. The doctor nods with exaggerated wisdom and pronounces, "A classic case of soldier's nerves," which is Victorian for "I don't know and I don't want to know." Samuel tries to resume normal life, helping in the garden, repairing a fence, sitting at the dinner table. But he can barely get through an hour without feeling like his bones are vibrating. His wife watches him pace the porch every night, then every hour, then every few minutes. He tells her he needs something for the pain. She doesn't realize he means all the pain, not just the wound. You walk down the street to visit Corporal Lewis Turner, who spends most of his morning sitting silently by the fire. During the war, morphine made the horrors bearable. Now, without it, everything feels too sharp, too loud, too heavy. He shakes, he sweats. He startles at the sound of a dropped spoon. His mother brews him tea. His doctor prescribes more morphine, convinced Lewis has lingering battlefield inflammation. So the cycle deepens. Doctors don't see addiction, they see chronic pain, sensitive nerves, weak constitutions. Men who once relied on morphine to survive battle now rely on it to survive breakfast. They refill prescriptions freely because their physicians treat the symptoms without understanding the cause. You travel to a local general store where bottles of laudanum sit neatly on shelves beside flour, cloth, and lamp oil. Veterans stop by one after another, purchasing just a little to help with sleep or appetite or feeling not quite right. The cashier doesn't blink. This is normal now. What society calls soldier's disease is blossoming quietly across the country. No one realizes these men are chemically dependent. Instead, the public assumes they are simply damaged by war, emotionally fragile, physically broken, haunted by memories. This is partially true, but it is also incomplete. In another home, you sit beside a veteran named Elijah, who used to be lively, talkative, and fond of trying to play instruments he wasn't good at. Now he moves like a man underwater. He stares into nothing, hands shaking as he struggles not to reach for the small vial hidden under his pillow. His family whispers about his moodiness. His doctor suggests taking more fresh air. Elijah nods politely and then takes another dose when no one is looking. Addiction hides easily in a world where no one recognizes it. Soldiers suffering withdrawal become irritable, nauseated, dizzy, and desperate, but their symptoms are chalked up to grief or trauma or even laziness. They're told to toughen up, to pray harder, to get more sunlight, all while the root cause pulses quietly through their bloodstreams. You watch Samuel, Lewis, Elijah, and countless others navigate this invisible burden. They were heroes in war, but at home they feel ashamed, confused, unable to control their cravings. What they don't know, and cannot know, is that their condition has a name, that it is real, that it is not weakness, that future generations will eventually understand it. But for now, in the dim glow of gas lamps and quiet kitchens, the veterans of the Civil War battle a new enemy, one hidden inside their veins, fed by a miracle drug that no one realized carried a shadow. You're visiting a parlor where well-dressed Victorian women sip morphine mixtures disguised as nerve tonics, casually becoming dependent while pretending it's just for ladylike headaches. The room is a masterpiece of floral upholstery and questionable air quality. Heavy drapes trap both warmth and the collective sighs of generations. A porcelain teapot releases a gentle curl of steam, aromatic and innocent, until you notice the discreet vial beside it, its label reading tonic for female disposition. A polite lie. Inside is morphine, sweetened and delicately flavoured so it can pass as something less alarming than industrial-grade opiates in a teacup. The women sit elegantly, gloved hands resting on embroidered skirts, each balancing a teacup filled with what is essentially the 19th century version of emotional cheating. They laugh softly, discussing husbands, children, piano recitals, and how exhausting it is to be held to the standard of graceful at all times. Every few minutes someone raises her cup to her lips, not because she's thirsty, but because the tonic makes everything feel like it has a soft focus filter. You sit beside Mrs. Fairchild, a woman whose posture is so perfect it makes your spine self-conscious. She tells you she takes her tonic only on days when her nerves flutter, which, based on how often she sips, seems to include all days ending in day. Her doctor prescribed it to help with female excitement, an umbrella term covering everything from actual anxiety to disagreeing with your husband about wallpaper. Across the room, Miss Eleanor performs a similar dance of denial. She refuses to admit she might be reliant on her mixture. "I simply enjoy the calm," she says, stirring her cup with fastidious precision. Her hand trembles when the tonic runs low, but she chalks it up to the chill in the air, which is bold considering the parlour is approximately the temperature of a baking scone. The most heartbreaking part? They truly believe these mixtures are medicine. Doctors prescribe morphine for headaches, menstrual cramps, marital stress, and general feminine fragility. Entire advertisements brag about how morphine helps women maintain their poise, because nothing sells quite like telling a woman she'll be less emotional if she drinks this lovely, lavender-scented narcotic. You glance over at the piano where a mother quietly removes her gloves. Hidden beneath the lace is a tremor, not from illness, but from withdrawal. She pours herself another measure into the teacup when she thinks no one is looking. She swallows it with the determined dignity of someone refusing to acknowledge she's slipping underwater. Meanwhile, two younger women discuss the difficulty of keeping up with social expectations. Between hosting, visiting, sewing, and staying pleasant, one says, It's simply too much without a tonic. They clink teacups like champagne glasses. Their laughter sounds light, but underneath you hear something tight and tired. Morphine becomes their private refuge, a socially acceptable escape valve in a world where women cannot shout, cannot rest, cannot rebel, cannot even wear comfortable clothing without causing a scandal. The tonic makes emotional storms quiet, makes grief bearable, makes boredom tolerable, makes a suffocating life feel briefly softer. And so dependence grows quietly, like ivy climbing a wall. Their families don't question the tonic. Their doctors encourage it. Their social circles normalize it. After all, men drink whiskey openly. Why shouldn't women have a little something to steady their nerves? Soon, physical symptoms appear: shakiness, irritability, exhaustion, a strange hollowness in the mornings. But Victorian society is masterful at mislabeling things. These symptoms are called hysteria, anxiety, disobedience, or a weak constitution. The tonic, of course, becomes the treatment for the very symptoms it causes, a perfect trap disguised as porcelain gentility. Later in the afternoon, after several refills, the laughter grows looser. Voices soften. One woman slumps gracefully against the cushions, claiming the room feels like it's floating. Another begins waxing poetic about the floral wallpaper. When her tonic cup is empty, she unconsciously reaches for it again, fingers searching. As the hour winds down, the women slowly gather their gloves and handbags. Each is a little calmer, a little dreamier, a little more dependent. They promise to return next week for tea, gossip, and just a touch of chemical serenity. You watch them step back into the world, corseted, polite, exhausted, carrying their quiet secret in dainty bottles tucked inside embroidered pouches. Society expected them to be composed. Morphine made it possible at a cost none of them yet understood. Shelves are lined with miracle elixirs promising energy, confidence, digestion, spiritual alignment, and they all contain morphine. The labels say totally safe, the customers say, why am I floating? You're standing inside a bustling 19th century pharmacy, which is less a medical establishment and more a chaotic bazaar of questionable optimism. Brightly coloured bottles crowd the shelves, each one wrapped in lurid advertisements featuring testimonials written by people who may not actually exist. The air smells like a mixture of peppermint, desperation, and cheap alcohol. The main ingredients in many of these tonics, followed closely by morphine in quantities large enough to launch a small parade. A cheerful clerk gestures proudly at his wares. This one cures melancholy, lassitude, and spiritual hollowness, he chirps, pointing to a bottle of Dr. Fairweather's Life Restorer. The fine print, if you can call the blurry scribbles fine, reveals it contains morphine, alcohol, and perhaps a dash of cinnamon for flavour. You ask him if it's safe. He beams. Absolutely. We've had only 5 complaints this month, and 4 of those were spelling errors. You pick up another bottle, Professor Sullivan's lightning nerve oil. The instructions read, take whenever the world feels too sharp. You give it a gentle swirl. It sloshes ominously. A woman beside you leans in and whispers, don't take too much. I did yesterday and forgot my own birthday. She says this with a delighted smile, as though forgetting your place in the space-time continuum is a charming personality quirk. Patent medicines exploded in popularity because they filled a gap. People needed remedies, doctors were expensive, and pharmacies were the 1800s equivalent of browsing the self-help aisle at 2 a.m. These bottled miracles promised everything: long life, happiness, vigour, charisma, cured gout, repaired marriages, improved spiritual vibrations. The only thing they did not promise was honesty. The sales pitches are incredible. One pamphlet announces, restores youthfulness. Another advertises, a gentle cure for nervous collapse. A third proudly proclaims, recommended by 11 out of 10 physicians, a mathematical impossibility, but no one is checking the math because everyone is too busy trying to cure their hectic nerves. You weave between customers sampling elixirs from rows of tiny tasting cups, like some kind of horrifying opiate-based wine festival. A man with mutton chops the size of small domesticated pets takes a swig of Mother Templeton's calming cordial and immediately exclaims, "I can feel my anxieties melting." His wife pats him on the shoulder and says gently, "Darling, your hat is melting too." In the corner, a travelling salesman performs a dramatic demonstration. He holds up Dr. Pandora's universal elixir, claiming it cures joint pain, backaches, sorrow, digestive problems, loneliness, boredom, fainting, hiccups, and a certain listlessness of the soul. He takes a large swig. His pupils dilate. He begins reciting poetry. The crowd claps enthusiastically. You approach the children's section, yes, there is one, and find bottles labelled for teething, tantrums, and robust nighttime peace. They contain morphine in doses that would stun a modern parent into a silent scream. Victorian parents purchase these bottles without hesitation, appreciating the convenience of medicating childhood into gentle, unconscious compliance. Back at the counter, the clerk rings up a stack of remedies for a customer suffering from nervous exhaustion, which in 1800s language means any emotion whatsoever. The man leaves floating slightly, literally drifting sideways into the street like a balloon that's lost interest in gravity. The problem is not that these remedies don't work. They work too well. Pain dissolves, emotions soften, life feels pleasantly blurry around the edges. But as customers return day after day for stronger doses, the clerk shrugs. "People love our products," he says proudly. You suspect what he means is, people can't stop taking them even if they try. You linger by the door, watching customers drift in and out, blissful, dazed, or mildly hallucinating. Everyone believes they've discovered a shortcut to inner peace, unaware they're walking straight into the early shadows of a public health crisis. Patent medicines weren't just cures. They were the 1800s coping mechanism for a world with too much hardship and not enough science. And behind every ornate label and cheerful slogan was the same quiet truth. Morphine was selling solutions, and no one realized the real problem was inside the bottle. You're in a medical conference watching doctors argue over whether morphine addiction is real. One insists people simply need more discipline. Another suggests maybe addiction exists. The conference hall smells faintly of tobacco, starch, and the kind of intellectual overconfidence that powered most 19th century medical disasters. Long wooden benches creak under the weight of physicians in stiff collars, their faces arranged into expressions of very serious thought. On stage, a speaker clears his throat dramatically, as though he's about to announce the discovery of fire rather than the obvious truth that giving out morphine like candy may have consequences. He begins by citing a concerning number of patients who seem unable to stop taking the drug. Murmurs ripple through the room. One doctor scoffs loudly and announces that any patient who lacks the moral strength to stop simply needs a brisk walk and firmer resolve. A cluster of his colleagues nod solemnly, the way people do when they've decided facts are optional today. Another doctor rises, a soft-spoken man whose spectacles suggest he reads more than he sleeps. He dares to utter the radical idea that perhaps addiction is not a moral failure, but a physical dependence caused by the drug itself. The audience stares at him, as though he just suggested the moon is filled with raccoons. Arguments erupt. A portly physician shouts that morphine is perfectly safe when used with dignity. A younger doctor counters that his patients experience cravings so intense they would trade family heirlooms for another dose. Someone in the back claims dependence is caused not by morphine, but by weak nerves inherited through the maternal line. The crowd oohs, not because this makes sense, but because blaming mothers is always fashionable in Victorian science. On stage, a grey-bearded surgeon points to case studies, patients who used morphine for pain and never recovered the ability to live without it. He lists symptoms: restlessness, shaking, insomnia, irrational fear, physical collapse. The audience listens politely, then claps half-heartedly, troubled but unconvinced. Facts are inconvenient when they undermine your best painkiller. You drift toward the refreshment table, where doctors refill teacups and privately complain about their own morphine habits. One mentions he takes it only for sleep. Another admits it helps him manage stress. A third whispers that he uses it before performing surgery because it steadies the hand. None of them connect the dots. They are, in essence, debating addiction while actively demonstrating it. Back inside, the debate intensifies. A physician dramatically opens a box filled with anonymous patient letters begging for help controlling their morphine use. The crowd quiets. For a moment, the reality of suffering hangs heavy in the room. Then another doctor stands and says, "Well, have we considered that these patients simply enjoy feeling unburdened? Perhaps the solution is to give them less weak character." The room erupts again, half in laughter, half in outrage. You rub your temples. Humanity's learning curve is aggressively curved. Gradually, agonizingly slowly, some doctors begin shifting their views. They notice patterns: patients needing escalating doses, withdrawal symptoms when the drug is withheld, improved function when supervised tapering occurs. A few physicians propose guidelines, warnings, or alternative therapies. Others roll their eyes and call them alarmists. You watch as one earnest doctor tries to introduce the word addiction, only to be drowned out by a rotund gentleman insisting the correct term is morphine habituation, which sounds less alarming and therefore, in his opinion, preferable. He then declares that severe cases should be treated with more morphine, but carefully. The entire front row nods as if this is profound wisdom. By the conference's end, nothing is resolved. A handful of doctors leave convinced addiction is real. Others remain firm that any patient struggling simply lacks fortitude or adequate prayer. A few decide this debate is tedious and head home to take their own morphine for stress relief. As the hall empties, you stand alone among the abandoned pamphlets and cooling tea. You can feel the world inching toward understanding, but inching slowly like a tired tortoise dragging a medical diploma. Addiction is real. The evidence is everywhere. But the medical world, entrenched in tradition, pride, and the intoxicating convenience of morphine, will take decades to fully accept it. Tonight, though, you've witnessed the first cracks in the wall, the moment when denial met data, and denial blinked. Step into a dim, smoky room where people recline on cushions, blissfully unaware that the relaxation culture happening here will shape decades of drug policy and uncomfortable political cartoons. The air hits you first, warm, heavy, perfumed with the bittersweet scent of burning opium. It curls around you like a sleepy cat, softening the edges of the room until everything feels slightly underwater. Lanterns glow dimly through the haze, casting lazy shadows across low tables and embroidered drapes. A hush settles over the space, not forced, but flowing naturally from the collective exhale of everyone inside. Men and women lounge on plush cushions arranged in sprawling improvised nests. Some recline like fainting aristocrats, one arm draped dramatically across the forehead. Others sit cross-legged, staring into the smoke with the intense concentration of someone deciphering cosmic secrets. A few have already drifted into deep opium dreams, faces serene, limbs loose, mouths slightly open, as if they're whispering to another world. A server floats by with small ceramic pipes, delicate as bird bones. He hands them out with the calm efficiency of a librarian distributing overdue fines. Near him, a long wooden tray holds balls of dark opium paste, sticky and glistening like forbidden jam. A man at your elbow demonstrates how to heat the paste gently over an oil lamp, inhaling the smoke with a practiced motion that suggests he's done this a lot. This is the opium den, part social club, part dream chamber, part mild societal scandal. People come here to escape the grind of industrial life, escape the foggy misery of Victorian winters, escape their own churning thoughts. For many, this is the only place they can breathe deeply, feel warm, and forget, however briefly, the relentless machinery of the world outside. A pair of young poets in the corner whisper about inspiration, claiming their creativity expands in the haze. One waves a notebook filled with spiralling verses that make absolutely no sense outside this room. He beams with pride anyway. Art is subjective, but opium definitely helps him believe it's good. Next to them, a middle-aged banker relaxes so thoroughly you worry he may dissolve into the floorboards. His boots are kicked off, jacket undone, tie askew. He looks more at peace here than he has anywhere in a decade. A woman beside him traces shapes in the air with her fingers, mesmerised by trails only she can see. Yet despite the tranquility, there's an undercurrent of tension, something society pretends not to notice by day but obsesses over by night. Newspapers publish sensational stories about dens corrupting the youth, destroying morality and turning respectable citizens into languid noodles. Cartoonists draw exaggerated scenes of hypnotized Europeans being lured by foreign vice, producing propaganda that fuels xenophobia more efficiently than coal fuels Victorian trains. The truth, as usual, is far less dramatic and far more human. Most of the people here are tired, overworked, lonely, curious, desperate for a respite from pain, both physical and emotional. Opium doesn't create villains, it creates numbness, and numbness, in a world with little softness, is seductive. As you move deeper into the den, the lighting grows dimmer. Someone plays a soft melody on a stringed instrument, a slow, wandering tune that seems to dissolve into the smoke. You step over a couple whispering dream fragments to each other and approach a quiet alcove where a man lies back, exhaling long ribbons of smoke. He murmurs, "Everything feels far away in a good way." His friend nods, eyes half-lidded. "Tomorrow will be awful," he adds, an observation made with a surprising amount of serenity. The two share a lazy laugh. This is the paradox of the dens, peaceful in the moment, punishing afterward. For some this becomes occasional indulgence, for others, quiet habit, and for a few tragic dependence. But in this moment, this room filled with smoke, dreams and drowsy murmurs, none of them are thinking about that. You stand near the doorway, watching the scene sway softly between beauty and danger. Victorian nightlife at its sleepiest and most intoxicating. A place where time slows, thoughts drift, and tomorrow feels like a distant rumour. Newspapers begin panicking. Doctors panic. Governments panic. Meanwhile, you quietly back away from the morphine bottle that's been sitting on every household shelf for 50 years. By the 1890s, society wakes up with the collective emotional energy of a person who has just checked their bank account after a weekend they don't remember. The morphine problem, long ignored, joked about, or politely misfiled under quirks of modern living, suddenly looms like an unpaid bill, and everyone, all at once, decides to freak out. You wander through a bustling city street and see newspaper boys waving headlines that scream things like "Opium, ruins, families, and morphine mania." The public gasps as if this is brand new information, and not the extremely predictable outcome of giving entire populations unlimited access to narcotics for half a century. Inside a cafe, businessmen clutch their papers with trembling hands, muttering about the downfall of civilization. A woman nearby fans herself dramatically after reading a story about a gentleman who consumed an entire bottle of soothing syrup in one sitting. The waiter overhears and casually says, "My uncle did that last week." You enter a doctor's office where several physicians are huddled together in a cluster of denial and confusion. One is pacing, waving a medical journal filled with alarming case reports. It appears, he declares, that morphine may be problematic. The others stare at him as if he has just accused oxygen of misbehaving. Another doctor, older and deeply stubborn, crosses his arms. Impossible. My patients are fine. You look over his shoulder and see one such patient in the waiting room, rocking back and forth, sweating profusely and mumbling to his cane. Fine is a generous interpretation. For decades, doctors assumed morphine dependency was rare, a fluke, a personal weakness, or a female nervous condition. But now, with cases everywhere, denial becomes much harder to maintain. Clinics report patients who cannot cease taking morphine without collapsing emotionally or physically. Pharmacists observe customers returning multiple times a week for emergency refills. Even the most oblivious Victorian medical minds begin to see a pattern forming in big, sparkly letters. Governments join the panic with gusto, committees form, reports are drafted. Politicians dramatically declare that something must be done, although no one knows what that something is. Some propose bans, others suggest taxes. A very enthusiastic man recommends replacing morphine with vigorous exercise, which earns him several confused stares. Meanwhile, patent medicine companies scramble to rebrand. Bottles that once proudly advertised morphine, in bold lettering now quietly shrink the font until it resembles a guilty whisper. New labels boast phrases like just a hint of opiate or gentle, controlled relief. Some companies attempt full denial, claiming their products were never addictive and that customers simply enjoyed them too enthusiastically. You walk into a typical household where a dusty morphine bottle sits on the mantel, next to a framed family portrait and a dried-out floral arrangement. The family gathers around the evening paper, gasping at stories of addiction as if this bottle hasn't been the star of their medicine cabinet for 2 generations. Mother clutches her pearls. Father strokes his moustache solemnly. Grandma mutters, "We used to put that in the Christmas punch." Social clubs, churches and ladies' societies begin holding meetings about the morphine crisis, complete with pamphlets, refreshments, and at least one elderly attendee loudly insisting that everything was better when people minded their own business. The greatest irony of all? Many of the alarmed citizens panicking about opium and morphine dependency are still using those same products. They declare the situation dire, vow reform, then take a discreet sip of laudanum just to settle the nerves after all that upsetting news. It becomes clear, very quickly, that society is not equipped for this revelation. There are no rehab centres, no standards for prescribing, no understanding of withdrawal, no vocabulary for addiction beyond calling it moral failure or habitual weakness. Everyone wants the problem solved, but no one knows how. The 1890s mark the moment when the world collectively stops, stares at the mess it made and says, "Ah, this seems bad." Newspapers howl, doctors scramble, governments convene, and you? You take one last look at the morphine bottle glowing suspiciously in the lamplight and decide with gentle conviction to step away from it forever. A German scientist proudly announces he's created a non-addictive morphine replacement. You take one look at the bottle labelled heroin and immediately feel the future cringing. You're standing in a sparkling laboratory at the end of the 19th century, a place full of polished brass instruments, glass vials gleaming in the light, and the unmistakable scent of overconfidence. The scientist beams at you like a proud parent presenting a newborn, except the child is a chemical compound destined to become the wildest plot twist in medical history. He gestures to the neatly labelled bottle, heroin, written in elegant script, as if branding will distract from the fact that this substance is one small vowel away from full disaster. He explains that it comes from diacetyl morphine, purified and transformed to create what he insists will be the future of safe pain relief. No cravings, no dependency, no withdrawal. Pure, modern, scientific relief. He practically sparkles with optimism. You nod politely, because you don't have the heart to tell him the next century will prove him hilariously, catastrophically wrong. Around the room, colleagues gather, swirling beakers and taking excited notes. One tests the new substance and declares it remarkably invigorating. Another says it produces a heroic feeling, thus the name heroin, and which is science speak, for we are getting ahead of ourselves in spectacular fashion. Soon, samples are packaged and sent to pharmaceutical companies, who immediately begin selling heroin as a miracle cure. Posters pop up everywhere. Smiling children, cheerful mothers, vigorous businessmen, all praising this new potion that promises relief without risk. Advertisements proclaim things like, the safe substitute, and recommended for coughs, colds, pain, and the occasional existential crisis. You wander into a pharmacy and watch the chaos bloom. A clerk eagerly stocks bottles of heroin next to cough syrup, headache powders, and digestion aids. A mother buys some to help her child with bronchitis. A man purchases it for insomnia. Another takes home a bottle because his neighbour told him it makes chores strangely enjoyable. Heroin spreads with breathtaking speed. Doctors prescribe it for morphine addiction, believing they've found a cure, because nothing solves a chemical dependency like switching to a stronger chemical dependency. They watch patients take heroin and see rapid improvement. Fewer withdrawal symptoms, more energy, less pain. What they don't realise is that heroin is simply giving the brain an even bigger high, smoothing over the craving with a velvet hammer. In hospitals, nurses notice patients growing oddly attached to this new medicine. They ask for it frequently. They glow with enthusiasm after taking it. Some refuse other treatments in favour of the heroic remedy. When the effects wear off, their eyes dim and their agitation rises, subtle signs that Victorian physicians dismiss as nervous constitutions. Meanwhile, scientists continue to celebrate. Papers are published praising heroin's non-addictive nature. Conferences feature physicians extolling its safety, unaware they're witnessing the early symptoms of a massive collective delusion. The hype builds and builds, like a balloon someone keeps inflating despite the ominous stretching noises. Then cracks appear. Patients begin showing withdrawal symptoms even more intense than morphine users. Some require larger and larger doses to feel normal. Others develop erratic behaviour that families quietly describe as worrying. Doctors start noticing that patients treated with heroin for coughs return weeks later, pale, shaking, and deeply unwell. Confusion spreads. How could the miracle drug be causing problems? Weren't they told it was safe? Even the companies selling heroin appear baffled. They issue statements like, "Results may vary," which is pharmaceutical for we have absolutely no idea what we've unleashed. Governments become alarmed. Reports pile up. Addiction spreads faster than anyone predicted. Newspapers run stories with headlines like, "Is the cure worse than the disease?" Scientists quietly revisit their data, realizing they perhaps didn't test heroin rigorously enough, or at all. You return to the laboratory where it all began. The proud scientist now looks bewildered as he reads letter after letter detailing heroin dependency. His face falls. You can practically see the moment he realizes his safe alternative is about to become one of the world's most infamous substances. In the dim light of the lab, surrounded by vials of well-intentioned disaster, you feel the weight of history turning. The plot twist isn't just that heroin was invented. The twist is that it was invented with love, hope, science, and zero understanding of how the human brain works. You flip through old advertisements showing morphine as a cheerful cure-all featuring smiling children. A doctor assures you it's ideal for long-term use. This man should not have a license. The ad pages crackle beneath your fingers, brightly inked, absurdly confident and aggressively incorrect. Little cartoons dance in the margins, rosy-cheeked babies, well-rested mothers, men in suits who appear blissfully unaware that their bowler hats are crooked. These people are thrilled. Why? Because they've discovered the magic elixir currently being advertised as the household solution to every inconvenience of the human experience. Each ad is worse than the last. Morphine, a friend to the family, boasts one. Another promises that morphine supports healthy digestion and moral clarity, which is a bold claim for a substance that makes half its users forget what year it is. A particularly horrifying pamphlet shows a baby, smiling proudly, holding a bottle of laudanum like it just won a spelling bee. The caption reads, "Good for teething, restlessness, and general childhood fuss. Childhood fuss. Incredible." Behind you, a Victorian salesman appears, flipping his moustache with the swagger of someone who has never once read a medical study. He informs you that the modern household cannot thrive without a range of chemical solutions. He gestures grandly to a wall of bottles with labels like Dr. Emery's Marvel tonic, Instant Peace in a Jar, and the Housewife's Secret Assistant. The last one features an illustration of a woman reclining in a chair while her children sit peacefully beside her, clearly sedated into cherubic compliance. You walk deeper into the shop and see a crowd gathered around a charismatic pitchman standing on a crate. He waves a bottle of morphine mixture in the air like he's auctioning off a family heirloom. Safe, effective, recommended by physicians nationwide, he cries. Perfect for headaches, nerves, sleeplessness, stomach upset, melancholy, sinus trouble, boredom, and that vague sense of doom you feel on rainy afternoons. The audience nods solemnly. They've all felt that rainy afternoon doom. There's a complete absence of dosage information, just vague instructions like take freely as needed or consume liberally until symptoms subside. The symptoms are never defined. Neither is liberally. You begin to understand why entire generations drifted peacefully through the late 1800s, like ghosts wearing respectable clothing. You flip another page. A doctor beams from the illustration, pointing at a bottle with paternal pride. His caption, "Ideal for chronic use," builds character and fortitude. The irony nearly knocks you unconscious. Behind him stands a nurse holding a syringe the size of a clarinet, wearing an expression that says she has never questioned a prescription in her life. Modern pharmaceutical rules don't exist yet. No requirements for testing, no disclaimers, no ingredient lists written in panic-proof tiny font. Companies can print whatever they want, and they do. Non-habit forming becomes the go-to lie of the era, stamped onto every bottle with the confidence of a man swearing he didn't eat the last cookie, even though crumbs decorate his entire shirt. A woman browsing the shelves turns to you. "My husband takes this one," she says proudly, holding up a bottle of sweet sleep elixir. The front label shows a man napping peacefully in a hammock. The back label lists nothing except guaranteed soothing. She leans in conspiratorially. He sleeps wonderfully now, practically all the time. You resist the urge to escort her gently to the nearest sanctuary with actual drug safety laws. You wander toward the children's section. Yes, again, there is one, and find a syrup called Little Angel's Nighttime Relief. The label features a pair of toddlers floating among stars, holding hands with a crescent moon. The recommended dose is unbelievably generous. Tiny angelic bliss, brought to you by Morphine. Doctors, meanwhile, serve as unofficial brand ambassadors. They recommend these products with gusto. Some even appear in ads posing next to mothers and children, smiling with the self-assurance of men who have never once paused to ask whether giving narcotics to infants might be a problematic business model. Their endorsements read like fever dreams. I trust this remedy for myself, my patients, and my horse. Wonderful. So glad the horse is included. As you close the last advertisement, you feel a wave of calm and horror. The cheerful graphics, the soothing promises, the upbeat slogans, all masking the same truth. No one here understands what they're selling. Not really. And in their blissful ignorance, they created one of the most dangerous marketing eras in medical history. You set the pamphlet down gently, exhale, and whisper. This is why we have regulations now. You visit a facility where doctors attempt to cure addiction by giving patients smaller doses of morphine, or whiskey, or both. Medical science was truly in its experimental era. The Rehabilitation Centre, if we're being generous enough to call it that, sits on a quiet country estate, as if distance from civilization alone can solve chemical dependency. The building is charming from the outside, ivy climbing the walls, windows thrown open to let the healing air circulate, and a front door that creaks with the gravitas of impending disappointment. Inside, however, it's clear nobody knows what they're doing. The atmosphere is equal parts hospital ward, rest home, and tavern. A doctor in a rumpled waistcoat rushes past carrying a tray with 2 bottles, one labelled morphine, reduced strength, and the other simply marked whiskey, therapeutic. You realise very quickly this is not a place where protocols exist. This is a place where hope and confusion shake hands and call it treatment. A patient named Harold greets you with a weak smile as he reclines on a chaise, wrapped in 3 blankets despite it being warm enough to cook bread on the windowsill. He explains that he's here because he couldn't sleep without the medicine. Now the doctors are helping him remove his dependency by giving him slightly less of the medicine. Harold describes this plan with the same unsure tone you'd use if someone told you the cure for overeating is fewer pies, but still pies. You join a morning session led by Dr. Pembroke, a man whose moustache is more confident than he is. He proudly announces their latest innovation, the gentle taper method, a groundbreaking system in which they reduce the morphine dose by eyeballing it each day. He holds up a beaker, squints, shrugs, and pours out what looks suspiciously like the exact same amount as yesterday. The patients applaud weakly, mostly because applause is expected. In the next room you witness the competing school of thought, the whiskey substitution method. Dr. Alcott, who smells faintly of oak barrels and regret, claims that a controlled whiskey regimen can help ease the nerves of withdrawal. Several patients sit in a semicircle sipping delicately from glasses, while one man loudly declares he feels spiritually aligned. Another immediately falls asleep. When you ask Dr. Alcott how replacing one addictive substance with another solves the problem, he beams. Because this time, he explains, they're drinking under medical supervision. This is said with the certainty of a man who has never encountered irony. Rehab in this era is less about understanding addiction and more about managing symptoms, like slapping decorative wallpaper over a structural crack. Patients shake, sweat, weep, and beg for more morphine. Some wander the halls at night looking for hidden stashes of syrup. Others cling tightly to their blankets, whispering prayers that sound suspiciously like bargaining. Doctors react to these withdrawal symptoms with absolute confusion. One insists patients simply need more fresh air. Another prescribes vigorous walks. A third believes cold baths will reset the constitution. You watch a line of miserable patients being escorted outside to walk laps around the garden. One mutters, "I'd trade this rose bush for a single drop of morphine," and you believe him. Despite the chaos, some treatments show mild success, mostly because withdrawal eventually ends if the patient somehow manages to survive it. But there's no emotional support, no understanding of cravings, no counselling, just sheer endurance, and the hope that the human body can push through chemical chaos with enough stern encouragement. You sit with a young woman named Eloise, who trembles as she explains that she never knew. The tonic prescribed for her headaches could cause such overwhelming need. She wants to quit. She really does. But every cell in her body feels like it's screaming. You hold her hand as her breath shakes. The doctor enters, nods solemnly, and gives her another partial dose of morphine. Eloise sighs with relief. You sigh with existential dread. Despite their bumbling methods, these early physicians are not malicious, just hopelessly uninformed. They want to help. They try. They fail often. But their failures plant the earliest seeds of recognition that addiction is something deeper, something more powerful than willpower alone, something that requires understanding, not judgment. And as you walk out of the rehab centre, past a patient sipping whiskey through a straw while another negotiates the gentle taper, you can't help but marvel. This is how addiction treatment began. Messy, misguided, and accidentally hilarious, but undeniably the start of a long, complicated journey toward healing. Suddenly you're in 1914 when governments finally decide to regulate morphine, because apparently decades of mass addiction wasn't persuasive until tax revenue got involved. You stand in a bustling American city as the world shifts uneasily beneath your feet. The industrial age is in full swing. Automobiles cough down uneven streets. Factories belch smoke like irritated dragons. And inside government buildings, men in stiff suits gather to address the opiate problem that has, very predictably, spiraled mightily out of control. The Harrison Narcotics Tax Act arrives not with moral clarity, but with paperwork, a mountain of it. The government frames the law as a revenue measure, because heaven forbid they admit it's actually about public health. According to Congress, the real danger of morphine isn't widespread addiction. It's that people aren't paying taxes on widespread addiction. You slip into a crowded hearing room where lawmakers debate the issue with the drama of actors in a courtroom TV show minus the accuracy. One senator gravely declares, "These substances must be controlled." Another adds, "and taxed." The room nods, relieved to have found their moral centre: forms, fees, and fines. Outside in the streets, life is shifting more chaotically. Doctors gather in knots of concern, gripping the morning paper like it just personally offended them. The Harrison Act requires that anyone handling narcotics must register, report, document, and justify every prescription. This sounds reasonable until you realise that most doctors have been giving morphine to anyone who sneezed too dramatically. Now, they must explain themselves. You stand in a doctor's office as he tries to interpret the new regulations. His brow furrows, his glasses fog. Pages of complex legal text sprawl across his desk like a defeated octopus. "So I can prescribe morphine," he mutters, "but not too much morphine, and not for addiction." But addiction might still need treatment. But treatment cannot include morphine, unless he trails off, lost in a legal maze that even the lawmakers who wrote it don't fully understand. Patients feel the change immediately. People who have relied on morphine for years, whether for pain, trauma, or because they were unwittingly steered into dependence, suddenly find themselves cut off. Pharmacies tighten their ledgers, doctors hesitate, supplies dwindle, and no one explains the new system clearly because no one actually knows the new system clearly. You follow an elderly woman named Martha, who has been using morphine since her doctor prescribed it decades earlier for winter aches. which turn out to have been winter depression. She arrives at the pharmacy only to be told she needs updated paperwork. Then she needs her doctor to file additional paperwork. Then the doctor needs the government to accept said paperwork. Martha stares blankly, realizing bureaucracy is more painful than arthritis. Meanwhile, enforcement agents begin prowling around doctors' offices searching for improper use. Some physicians, terrified of legal trouble, shut off narcotic prescribing completely. Others go underground. A few grow resentful and declare, "Fine then, let patients suffer." You watch as one doctor theatrically locks his laudanum cabinet and whispers, "No more." His patients immediately line up at the door asking why their medicine stopped working. A new problem emerges: withdrawal. The Harrison Act unintentionally triggers a wave of suffering among people who were dependent on morphine long before addiction had vocabulary or compassion behind it. They are not criminals. They are not weak. They are casualties of a system that encouraged morphine use for half a century, then abruptly changed its mind. On the streets, illicit markets blossom like night-blooming flowers. Men in long coats sell powdered relief from alleyways. Prices rise. Quality falls. Addiction worsens. The government announces that the act is working because the paperwork looks better. The reality, frankly, is a mess. Yet underneath the chaos, something important is happening. The world is beginning to acknowledge addiction not as a moral failing, but as a medical and social issue. It's clumsy, it's painful, it's punitive in ways that miss the mark. But it is, undeniably, the first attempt at real regulation. You stand beneath a gas lamp as night settles over the city. In your hand is a newspaper announcing the Harrison Act in triumphant typeface. Behind you, doctors argue, patients suffer, pharmacies panic, and lawmakers congratulate themselves. Change has started. Late, imperfect, tangled in paperwork, but started nonetheless. Morphine users go from patients to criminals overnight. You watch as people who once received prescriptions are now hiding bottles in their socks. You're standing on a city street in the mid-1910s, watching society do what it does best: overcorrect dramatically. Only a few months have passed since the Harrison Act took effect, but the cultural shift is seismic. Yesterday, addiction was an unfortunate side effect of good medicine. Today, it's a punishable offence. The same families who once praised morphine as a household staple now whisper nervously about who does and doesn't partake. You walk past a pharmacy where a stern clerk is turning away yet another long-time morphine user. "We can't give that out anymore without proper authorization," he says, adjusting his glasses with bureaucratic finality. The man he's speaking to looks desperate, not criminal, not dangerous, just someone whose body has forgotten how to exist without the drug society offered him for years. He sighs, nods, and leaves quietly, shoulders hunched against the sudden coldness of the world. Behind the pharmacy, however, you spot him again, negotiating with a man in a flat cap who sells liquid relief out of a suitcase. It's the same medicine he once received from licensed professionals, only now it's twice the price and half the purity. He tucks the small vial into his sock, pulling his pant leg low to hide it. Yesterday he was a patient. Today he's a fugitive from the moral panic police. Law enforcement officers patrol the streets more aggressively now, looking for illicit narcotics activity. In practice, this means they chase the most vulnerable people in society: war veterans, chronically ill patients, exhausted mothers, and labourers whose doctors once handed out morphine with cheerful enthusiasm. They stop individuals for looking nervous, which ironically describes nearly every person going through withdrawal. You wander into a doctor's office where 3 physicians argue in hushed tones. One is furious. "I can't treat my patients anymore. They need this medication." Another snaps back. "Do you want to lose your license? They'll arrest you." The third quietly confesses he now provides morphine under the table. for medical necessity, which is very noble and also very illegal by Tuesday morning. All three know the truth. Criminalization didn't cure addiction, it simply pushed it into the shadows. The worst part is the shame. Patients too embarrassed or frightened to seek help now suffer alone. A woman named Louise, once treated for nervous ailments with doctor-prescribed morphine, now lies awake at night, heart racing, palms sweating, wondering if she is a sinner or a criminal. Her husband hides her medicine in the lining of her coat so the children won't find it, or the authorities. In working-class neighbourhoods, quiet solidarity forms. People whisper the names of sympathetic doctors. They trade tips on where to buy safer supplies. They warn each other which police officers to avoid. Addiction becomes a community secret, passed between neighbours like a fragile, dangerous heirloom. Meanwhile, newspapers publish sensational cartoons depicting junkies as monsters lurking in alleyways, never mentioning that many of these so-called criminals are former medical patients abandoned by the very system that created them. You watch as one man reads such a newspaper, shakes his head in disgust, then discreetly takes a dose from a vial hidden in his boot. This era also marks the beginning of widespread incarceration for addiction-related offences. Courts, unsure how to interpret the Harrison Act, decide that dependency equals illegal possession. People are arrested simply for having the medication they once obtained legally. Judges insist they're cleaning up society, unaware they're also filling jails with the sick, not the dangerous. You follow a police officer performing an arrest. The criminal is a frail veteran who fought at San Juan Hill. His hands shake as he tries to explain he needs morphine to prevent excruciating withdrawal. The officer doesn't listen. The veteran is cuffed and taken away, leaving his walking stick behind. You pick it up. It feels heavier than it should. In the chaos, a small handful of medical professionals push back. They argue that addiction is a health issue, not a moral or legal failing. They write articles, advocate reforms, beg policymakers to show compassion. But their voices are drowned out by louder ones, voices insisting that punishment is the only cure. You stand on a street corner as dusk settles, watching citizens hurry home, keeping their coats tight, their secrets tighter. Bottles clink softly in hidden pockets. Eyes dart nervously. Society claims to be solving a crisis, but everywhere you look, people seem more frightened, more isolated, more unwell. Criminalization didn't end addiction. It just added consequences. Now the price of relief includes fear, stigma, and danger. And for millions, the story is far from over. In military hospitals, morphine becomes essential once again. You watch medics calmly inject soldiers while praying humanity doesn't repeat its last morphine-related disaster. The moment you enter a World War I medical tent, you notice two things: the relentless sound of artillery in the distance, and the calm, practiced motions of medics who've learned to work inside chaos. The air smells like antiseptic, mud, sweat, and metal. Dozens of injured men lie on stretchers, their uniforms shredded, faces pale, breaths ragged, and in the centre of it all, the familiar glint of morphine syringes. Medics kneel beside a soldier with shrapnel embedded in his leg. "Hold still," one says gently, though the soldier is already gripping the stretcher like it's the last stable thing in the universe. The medic draws morphine into a syringe with the efficiency of someone who has done this hundreds of times. The injection slips in. The soldier exhales. His face softens. The agony doesn't disappear, but it steps back slightly, giving him a few precious inches of comfort. You think back to the Civil War where doctors threw morphine around like confetti. This is different. The doses are measured. The records are kept. The medics know exactly what they're doing and what overuse can lead to. But despite medical advances, the truth remains. Morphine is the only thing standing between millions of soldiers and unbearable pain. As you move deeper into the ward, you see rows of soldiers recovering from surgeries performed under brutal conditions. Amputations, badly set fractures, burns, crushed limbs. War is a collection of ways the human body can be broken. Morphine gives surgeons time to work. It gives soldiers a fighting chance to survive the shock. But medics talk among themselves in hushed tones. "We have to watch how much we give," one says. Too much, and he doesn't finish. He doesn't have to. The world has already lived through the consequences of unrestrained morphine use, and no one wants a repeat performance. Still, necessity has a way of blurring caution. A soldier screaming on an operating table cannot be told, "Sorry, sir, we're trying to avoid nationwide addiction." Pain demands immediate solutions, not long-term planning, and so syringe after syringe is administered, each one a delicate trade-off between mercy and risk. When you step out into the daylight, the roar of planes fills the sky as World War II begins. New battlefields, new weapons, new horrors, but the same fragile human bodies. Morphine pouches become standard issue in medic kits. In the chaos of machine gun fire, bomb blasts, and desperate retreats, these little pouches are lifelines. You watch a battlefield medic sprint across open terrain, dodging explosions. He reaches a wounded soldier, breath ragged, hands trembling from adrenaline. His first act isn't to check for infection or assess the wound, it's to grab the morphine syrette clipped to his vest. He injects it quickly, marking the soldier's forehead with an M so others know the dose has been given. The medic then moves on, trusting the drug to quiet the pain long enough to keep the man conscious until extraction. In wartime, morphine's power feels both heroic and ominous, a blessing and a warning. Soldiers praise it, calling it a moment of peace in hell. But behind their gratitude is a shadow, the fear of becoming too familiar with relief. Many have heard stories about veterans from earlier wars, men who returned home with invisible wounds and an aching need they didn't understand. This time, military doctors try harder to avoid addiction. They track doses meticulously. They ration supplies. They run educational briefings. And yet, addiction still finds cracks to seep through. A soldier with severe burns might require morphine for weeks. A soldier with repeated injuries may receive dose after dose. Some return home still carrying a quiet, persistent craving. Back in a hospital tent, a medic wipes sweat from his brow. "I hope we're doing this right," he says softly, staring at the syringes lined on a tray. "I hope the world doesn't regret this again." You watch him steel himself and move to the next stretcher. The war doesn't pause for reflection. Pain doesn't wait for perfect ethical solutions, and morphine, dangerous, miraculous morphine, remains the best tool humanity has. As night falls over the battlefield, lanterns glow inside the medical ward. Soldiers sleep fitfully, dreamlessly, suspended in the fog between agony and silence. The world keeps fighting. The medics keep injecting. The cycle continues. And you walk away knowing that once again morphine has saved millions and quietly opened the door to complications no one is ready to confront. You're in a sleek fluorescent hospital where morphine is still used, but only with forms, signatures, triple checks, and a nurse who watches you like a hawk guarding cheese. The room hums with a soft whir of machines, monitors blinking, IV pumps clicking, distant footsteps muffled by polished floors. Everything smells faintly of sanitizer and determination. Gone are the chaotic tents, the questionable dosages, the let's eyeball it and hope approach of the 19th century. This is modern medicine, where opiates still exist, but now live inside a fortress of regulations, consent forms, digital logs, and stern reminders from every nurse within a 20-foot radius. A doctor enters, crisp white coat swishing with the dramatic confidence of someone who has completed 14 years of schooling and has a complicated relationship with caffeine. He explains your pain relief options in calm, measured tones. Non-opioids first, maybe physical therapy, maybe meditation apps. Only if you're truly suffering does he mention morphine, the Voldemort of painkillers, spoken cautiously, as if summoning it may summon consequences. He leaves, and the nurse steps in. She's holding the syringe like a sacred object, her expression deeply focused. Before she even approaches your bedside, she scans your ID bracelet, checks the computer, checks the syringe, checks the chart, checks your ID again, and then pauses as if listening for the universe to grant permission. No Victorian doctor would survive this room. They'd faint from the paperwork alone. When she finally injects the morphine, she does not leave. She stands beside you, arms crossed, monitoring your breathing with the intensity of a parent watching a toddler near a shelf of glass vases. "How are you feeling?" she asks every 30 seconds. Lightheaded? Nauseous? Too relaxed? Not relaxed enough? Are you seeing any imaginary raccoons? The medication hits your system gently but unmistakably. Warmth spreads. Pain softens. A fuzzy calm settles in. Familiar, ancient, a distant grandson of the chaos-causing elixirs that swept through the last 2 centuries. But here, in this room, morphine is no longer a casual comfort or a reckless miracle. It's a tool wielded with the precision of a tightrope walker balancing above a canyon. Down the hall, a pharmacist sits in front of a glowing computer screen like a wizard reading forbidden scrolls. Modern regulations require them to verify dosage limits, cross-check medications, confirm there are no interactions, review your past prescriptions, and ensure you're not unknowingly starring in a one-person reenactment of the opioid crisis. If anything looks even mildly suspicious, dosage, timing, a misplaced decimal, alarms ring, notifications appear, and someone from administration materializes with the speed of a summoned spirit. Meanwhile, pain specialists argue in conference rooms about how to balance compassion with caution. They know morphine saves lives, restores dignity, and prevents suffering, but they also carry the heavy knowledge of what happens when such drugs escape medical control. Every decision is wrapped in ethical nuance. Every prescription comes with a lecture. Every refill requires justification, documentation, and occasionally a small emotional sacrifice. You wander through the hospital observing how the modern world treats pain. People receive medications in controlled doses. They're monitored constantly. They're given pamphlets, hotlines, therapy referrals, and stern reminders not to operate machinery, make major life decisions, or online shop while on opioids. And yet, the need remains. Chronic pain is real. Post-surgical pain is real. End-of-life pain is real. These aren't Victorian complaints like nervous agitations from too much embroidery. These are complex medical realities. And morphine, flawed, powerful, dangerous, miraculous morphine, is still the closest thing we have to a guaranteed relief. You glance into a recovery room where a patient rests peacefully for the first time in days. Machines beep softly. Nurses move quietly. A physician checks vitals and nods with satisfaction. Here, morphine isn't a scandal or a miracle, it's simply a medicine. A heavily supervised, tightly regulated, deeply respected medicine. And as you step into the hallway, you feel it. Humanity walking the tightrope, balancing compassion on one side and caution on the other. Trying, finally, to learn from the centuries-long roller coaster of opiate history. Welcome to the late 20th century, where pharmaceutical companies take the morphine legacy, multiply it by corporate greed, and unleash a disaster no one was ready for. You find yourself in a glossy boardroom, the kind with too many leather chairs and not enough moral restraint. Executives in crisp suits beam proudly as they unveil their latest innovation. A new generation of opioid painkillers. They claim, loudly, repeatedly, suspiciously, that these pills are safe, practically non-addictive, a modern miracle. You sit quietly in your chair watching this display of confidence with the same sinking dread you'd feel watching a toddler juggle knives. Movie trailers' levels of optimism fill the room as sales reps rehearse their pitch lines. Better pain control, low risk, great for long-term use. The claims feel familiar, like déjà vu wearing a lab coat. History is politely tapping them on the shoulder, whispering, "We've literally done this before," but no one listens. Then the marketing campaign begins. Glossy ads show smiling grandparents gardening pain-free. Middle-aged dancers twirl joyfully. Construction workers lift beams like they're made of feathers. Everyone is happy, relaxed, and definitely not in imminent danger of chemical dependence. Doctors receive brochures filled with soothing language about breakthrough pain management, complete with tiny footnotes that might as well read, "Don't worry about the fine print, there's hardly any." You visit a doctor in 1997 who has just sat through a pharmaceutical-sponsored lunch presentation. He unwraps a branded pen, flips through a free notepad, and nods along as a rep explains that these new opioids are uniquely designed to prevent misuse. You stare at the doctor, silently begging him to remember literally anything about the last 200 years of opiate history. But he smiles, accepts a sandwich, and begins prescribing. Soon, prescriptions explode across the country. People with broken bones receive opioids. People with chronic pain receive opioids. People with mild discomfort receive opioids. People who looked at a chair and thought their back might hurt someday receive opioids. The pills become an everyday part of American life. Little beige buttons of relief in orange bottles with white caps. Patients love the effects at first. Pain melts away. Sleep improves. Stress quiets. The world softens into something manageable, but beneath that soft glow lurks the familiar shadow. Tolerance. Bodies crave higher doses. Doctors increase them. Pharma companies cheer. Refill after refill flows like a river, and the river deepens into dependency before anyone realizes they're standing in it. Some patients, cut off abruptly or unable to afford prescriptions, begin seeking cheaper, unregulated substitutes. Illicit markets boom. Overdose rates climb. Families watch loved ones slip into spirals they never expected. Law enforcement cracks down. Communities buckle. The same pattern that unfolded quietly in Victorian parlours, Civil War tents, and early rehab centres now plays out across entire towns, entire states, entire generations. You walk through a neighbourhood deeply scarred by the crisis. Closed factories, struggling families, flyers offering support groups flutter on telephone poles. A man sits on his porch, holding the bottle that started it all, shaking his head. "My doctor said it was safe," he says softly. Inside a hospital, doctors scramble to reverse the damage. They tighten prescribing rules. They build monitoring programs. They undergo training in addiction medicine, something that, shockingly, barely existed until now. Pharmacists install new safety systems. Emergency rooms stockpile naloxone. The world learns, slowly and painfully, to treat addiction as a medical issue rather than a moral failure. Meanwhile, lawsuits erupt. Communities take pharmaceutical companies to court, exposing memos that reveal executives knew far more than they admitted. Headlines scream, courtrooms fill. The public finally sees the full scale of the crisis laid bare. The manipulation, the misleading claims, the staggering profits made on human suffering. And yet, amidst all this devastation, modern medicine doesn't abandon pain relief entirely. It can't. Pain is real. Suffering is real. People still need help. The challenge becomes finding balance, acknowledging the need for compassion while respecting the dangerous legacy morphine started 2 centuries ago. As you step away, the echoes of history trail behind you. The opium dens, the Civil War tents, the velvet syringe kits, the snake oil advertisements, the quiet epidemics. And now, the newest chapter, one still unfolding, still healing, still striving to be better. You drift through a modern rehab centre, a research lab and a pharmacy, watching humanity try to balance compassion with caution, healing with harm, and history with progress. Your first stop is a rehab centre bathed in soft, neutral lighting, the kind designed to make everyone feel slightly calmer and slightly more introspective, even before the therapy begins. Patients chat quietly in the lobby, some nervous, some hopeful, all carrying stories shaped by pain, prescriptions, and the winding path of recovery. You join a group therapy session where people sit in a circle, sharing their experiences with an honesty that would make Victorian physicians spontaneously faint. A woman describes how a simple prescription after surgery spiraled into dependence. A man explains how he turned to illicit drugs when his medication was cut off abruptly. No one interrupts, no one judges. They nod, breathe deeply, and hold space for each other. A counsellor, kind eyes, calm voice, comfortable shoes, guides the conversation gently. They talk about triggers, coping mechanisms, brain chemistry, shame and resilience. The vocabulary of addiction has evolved. Physical dependence, psychological craving, neurochemical adaptation, trauma-informed care. For the first time in centuries, people aren't blamed for their biology. They're supported through it. Yet the struggle is real. Withdrawal is still brutal. Cravings still whisper. Lives still need rebuilding. Recovery is less of a finish line and more of a long, winding trail, with rest stops and occasional scenic breakdowns. But here, in this room, there is hope. Structured, researched, evidence-based hope. You move next to a research lab where scientists in lab coats peer into microscopes like detectives, examining the world's most dramatic crime scene. Their desks overflow with studies about opioid receptors, pain pathways, genetic risk factors, and new forms of treatment that don't rely on the old dangerous standbys. One researcher excitedly shows you a chart illustrating how chronic pain rewires the brain. Another walks you through experimental non-opioid painkillers that aim to soothe without seducing. The scientists talk about harm reduction, patient education, community support, concepts that would baffle their 19th century predecessors, who mostly talked about whether morphine should be flavoured with mint or lemon. In the corner, a whiteboard lists goals for the next decade. Safer medications, more accessible, addiction treatment, personalised pain management, reducing stigma, improving withdrawal care. Their optimism feels grounded, not naive. They know the history, they know the risks, but they also know progress comes from learning, not hiding. Finally, you walk into a modern pharmacy. Bright lights, organised shelves, a pharmacist who looks both exhausted and extremely competent, the ideal combination. You watch as a patient picks up a prescription. The pharmacist explains dosing carefully, mentions side effects, warns against interactions, and hands over a pamphlet that bluntly states, opioids carry significant risks. This level of transparency would have killed a Victorian apothecary on the spot. Behind the counter are medications for pain, anxiety, withdrawal, depression, sleep, and everything in between. Some are addictive, some are not. All come with warnings, labels, instructions, and most importantly, context. Even so, the tension is palpable. People still hurt. People still need relief. And doctors must decide every day how to manage pain without repeating history. Some patients advocate fiercely for access to opioids that genuinely improve their quality of life. Others caution against overprescribing. The world has not solved pain, nor addiction, nor the ethical maze between them. But at least humanity is trying, with unprecedented awareness, humility, and caution. You step back watching these three modern spaces overlap in your mind. Rehab, research, pharmacy, representing recovery, innovation, and responsibility. Together they form the best version of the future we currently have. Imperfect, improving, informed by centuries of mistakes. Morphine's story, once chaotic and unchecked, now stands at the crossroads of science and compassion. We cannot remove pain from human existence, but we can learn to treat it with respect. We can respect the power of relief, the fragility of dependence, and the need for support in the grey spaces between. As you leave, the automatic doors glide open, releasing you into the cool evening air. Humanity is still balancing on that tightrope, pain on one side, addiction on the other, but at least now, finally, we're not walking it blind. You step into a Victorian living room where every piece of furniture is aggressively floral, every lamp is aggressively dim, and every adult is aggressively relaxed. The reason? Morphine lives in nearly every cabinet right next to the flower, the cough drops, and Aunt Mildred's secret knitting tonic, which definitely has nothing to do with knitting. In a world of strict etiquette and emotional repression, morphine isn't just a medicine. It's the unofficial household mood stabilizer keeping everyone just functional enough to get through dinner without fainting into the aspic. The room smells faintly of lavender sachets and recently extinguished candles. Victorian Febreze. Lace doilies cover every available surface, even surfaces that have no business wearing lace. A grandfather clock ticks thoughtfully in the corner like a judgmental chaperone, and amidst all of this soft domestic chaos sit the members of a perfectly average, perfectly sedated Victorian family. Mrs. Pembroke, the matriarch, lounges on the sofa with the stiff poise of a woman held together entirely by corsetry and mild narcotics. At her feet sits a delicate glass bottle labelled Nerve Restorative, decorated with flowers smiling cheerfully despite containing enough morphine to tranquilize a moose. She sips it politely, Victorian ladies do not swig, and nods to herself, pleased that her emotional turbulence has once again been persuaded to leave the premises. Across the room, Mr. Pembroke reclines in an armchair reading the newspaper upside down. He isn't aware it's upside down. He's very relaxed. Earlier, he took a small dose of his rheumatism relief tincture, another flowery bottle that claims to treat everything from joint stiffness to general masculine irritability. Whatever masculine irritability he had is thoroughly muted. He hasn't blinked in several minutes. In the corner, Aunt Mildred sits with her knitting basket, though she hasn't actually knitted anything in 3 months. Inside the basket, nestled among yarn and needles, is a bottle of her infamous knitting tonic, which contains nothing related to knitting and everything related to avoiding confrontation. Whenever family tensions rise even a fraction, Aunt Mildred retires to her basket, claiming she needs to check on her stitches, then returns noticeably calmer and slightly glossy-eyed. Victorian children aren't immune to the household pharmacology either. Little Beatrice coughs twice, delicate, theatrical coughs, and immediately her mother brings over a spoonful of laudanum syrup, the universal cure for everything from colic to bad moods. Beatrice swallows it obediently and curls up on the chaise lounge, drifting into a peaceful stupor before the spoon is even back in the drawer. In the adjoining dining room, you notice a wooden cabinet filled with herbal teas, spices, and an entire shelf dedicated to household remedies, which is Victorian shorthand for heavily encouraged opiate consumption. Bottles labelled soothing drops, gentle balm, nightly peace mixture, and spirit tonic line the shelves. Even the cat has a bottle labelled calming veterinary elixir, which you pray no one has ever used. Victorian life demands emotional suppression. If you feel overwhelmed, you must swallow it. If you feel angry, swallow it. If you feel disappointed your husband spent the grocery budget on an elaborate cravat, swallow it or take a soothing dose of morphine and smile your way through the resentment. And so the cabinet becomes the true emotional centre of the household, its doors quietly creaking open whenever reality becomes too loud. You wander to the parlour window where a neighbour stops by to gossip with Mrs. Pembroke about the latest scandal involving Mrs. Abernathy fainting at choir practice. Her nerves simply gave out, Mrs. Pembroke says knowingly. Poor thing needs a restorative. That restorative is morphine. Everything is morphine. Half the street is floating through daily life with the serenity of Buddhist monks who accidentally wandered into a botanical opium garden. It's not malicious, it's not even reckless by Victorian standards. Morphine is simply normal, like sugar, salt, or wallpaper with alarming patterns. Doctors prescribe it freely. Apothecaries sell it proudly. Households keep it stocked for emergencies such as headaches, sprained wrists, and minor existential dread. No one knows the word addiction. They only know that life feels harder without their favourite bottle. As evening falls, lamps are lit, doilies are straightened, and family members settle into their nightly routines. Mrs. Pembroke takes a tiny sip just to relax. Mr. Pembroke decides he needs a little more for the joints. Aunt Mildred checks her knitting basket one last time. The house grows quieter, gentler, softer, almost dreamlike. You can feel history humming beneath the floral wallpaper, a reminder that this calm has a cost the Victorians won't recognise for decades. But for now, in this warm, perfumed living room, morphine is simply part of the household rhythm. A whispered comfort, a liquid hush, a chemical sigh smoothing the rough edges of Victorian life. Welcome to the 19th century, where people are very clearly addicted to morphine, but no one has the words for it. You watch as men mysteriously weaken, women take to the chaise lounge indefinitely, and doctors mutter, "Well, that's odd," before prescribing even more morphine. You stand in the middle of a parlour as someone shakily pours another dose, and you realise everyone knows something is very wrong, but they're all politely pretending it's just nerves, digestion, or possibly ghosts. The parlour is a museum of polite denial. Heavy curtains mute the light, muffling reality into a soft blur. A fireplace crackles lazily, as though even the flames have decided to take it easy. Lace doilies sit obediently on every surface, and the air smells faintly of lavender, worry, and tinctures. A gentleman on the sofa coughs weakly, though it's less a cough and more a weary sigh that admits defeat on behalf of his entire respiratory system. He reaches for a small glass bottle on the side table. His hand trembles, the bottle rattles, the entire room pretends it didn't happen. His wife delicately turns the page of her novel, saying nothing, hearing everything. The man pours himself another dose, downs it, and the trembling subsides briefly. Across from him, a woman reclines dramatically on a chaise lounge, one hand pressed to her forehead like a fainting aristocrat trapped in a melodrama. She has been resting on this chaise for 3 months. The doctor says her condition is due to nerves, a diagnosis Victorian physicians use the same way modern parents use "you're just tired." But you've seen her tonic bottle, cork worn, label smudged, nearly empty every other day. Her nerves aren't frayed, they're chemically rearranged. A visitor whispers to her husband, "My, she's become awfully languid, hasn't she?" He nods gravely, a touch of melancholy, I fear. Neither mentions the bottle on the mantel with a label promising relief from sadness, lethargy, stomach discomfort, spiritual gloom, and sensitivity to household noise. Meanwhile, another man across the room fidgets restlessly in his chair, tapping his foot against the wooden floor with growing panic. He claims he's adjusting to the weather, even though the weather is fine and he's been tapping since breakfast. He glances at the cabinet, at the drawer that hides his own supply, and excuses himself with the urgency of a man suddenly remembering an errand. Moments later, You hear the unmistakable clink of glass and the sigh of relief that follows. Victorian doctors visit these households regularly, diagnosing with the confidence of men who have absolutely no idea what they're dealing with. They examine pale faces, trembling hands, restlessness, withdrawal sweats, emotional volatility, all signs. Modern medicine recognizes instantly, and they respond with phrases like, "The constitution is weak," "The bile is unsettled," "The humours are disagreeing," "Women are prone to fragility," "Try more rest," and a small amount of morphine. They prescribe the very substance causing the problem with the flourish of a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat. Pleased, confident, oblivious. In many households, addiction hides behind decorum. Family members tiptoe around the issue, convinced it's inappropriate to mention that Aunt Beatrice is drinking laudanum like it's her second religion. At dinner, someone's hands shake so violently they nearly fling peas across the table. Everyone averts their eyes. Someone brings out the sherry. Someone else suggests a soothing dose after supper. All problems can be solved with more medicine. If the medicine is the problem, that's a puzzle for future generations. You drift into another room and find a journal left open on a desk. The entry reads, "I feel dreadful without the drops. Cannot sleep, cannot eat. Doctor says it is my temperament. I fear he is wrong." The ink trails off, shaky and desperate. This is the closest thing you've seen to an admission. And even then, the writer blames themselves, not the substance. Because the vocabulary isn't there yet. Addiction is not a recognized condition. It's described as moral weakness, hysteria, constitution failure, spiritual imbalance. People blame character, not chemistry. So sufferers hide their shame in drawers, cabinets, sewing baskets, and teacups. Back in the parlour, the gentleman on the sofa reaches again for the bottle, and this time 3 sets of eyes flick toward him, just for a moment. The room is full of quiet alarm no one knows how to name. A tension floats between the teacups, unspoken but palpable. Everyone senses the truth. Something is deeply wrong. No one has the language to say it, and so the 19th century drifts onward, elegant, composed, heavily sedated, waiting for a future that will finally name the shadows gathering in every polished cabinet. It's the late 1800s, and newspapers begin screaming headlines like, "The Opium Menace," even though the same papers are running ads for morphine cough syrup on the next page. You stroll through a bustling city where lawmakers blame immigrants. Immigrants blame lawmakers. And absolutely no one blames doctors, who, by the way, are the ones handing out morphine like Halloween candy. The public panic grows louder than your neighbour's opera singing, and suddenly addiction becomes less about medicine, and more about who society decides is dangerous. The streets buzz with tension and contradiction. Vendors hawk. Roasted chestnuts beside newspaper stands plastered with scary headlines. Opium eats souls. A city in peril. Are your neighbours secretly addicts? You glance below the fold and see a smiling Victorian baby holding a bottle of soothing syrup, now with extra morphine. The cognitive dissonance is so sharp you could use it to slice bread. You wander into a cafe where men sip coffee and debate loudly about the opium problem. One insists immigrants are to blame. Another says the real issue is moral decay. A third proposes banning opium dens, despite the fact that half the men at the table have laudanum bottles in their coat pockets. They sip, judge, sip again. The irony is thick enough to butter a scone. Step outside and you'll find lawmakers in full performative outrage mode. One politician makes a speech condemning foreign vices infiltrating our sacred streets. A reporter takes notes eagerly, ignoring the fact that the same politician is known to stop by his doctor 3 times a week for nerve tinctures, which are, of course, morphine. Moral panic always looks cleaner when pointed outward. You walk through Chinatown where the panic is most viciously focused. Despite the fact that opium dens are frequented by all kinds of people, including wealthy businessmen, bored students, and the occasional opera enthusiast, newspapers latch onto xenophobic caricatures. They portray the dens as corrupting lairs designed to ensnare innocent white women, a claim that says more about Victorian racism and melodrama than actual reality. The police begin raiding dens with theatrical flair. Meanwhile, respectable ladies in fashionable homes continue taking morphine for headaches, without a flicker of societal judgment. Addiction in rich parlours is seen as unfortunate. Addiction in immigrant communities is framed as a moral threat. Inconsistency doesn't merely exist, it forms the entire backbone of the era's drug policy. Walk a few blocks, and you encounter a meeting of a civic association determined to rescue our youth from vice. They stand beside posters showing exaggerated cartoons of opium users with wild eyes and clawed hands. One woman clutches her pearls dramatically as she reads about foreign evils invading her neighborhood, despite the fact that she literally just swallowed a morphine capsule for her nerves before walking in. The public panic grows feverishly theatrical. Rumors swirl. Opium will rot your brain, steal your morals, ruin your marriage, and possibly cause your piano to go out of tune. People believe addiction is contagious. Some believe only certain groups are biologically susceptible. Newspapers run wild with imagined dangers because fear sells, and nuance does not. And the doctors, the main conduits of morphine into Victorian bodies, carry on largely unscathed. They stand firmly outside the line of fire, dispensing prescriptions with the professional confidence of men who have collectively decided that accountability is overrated. When patients show signs of dependency, doctors shake their heads tragically and blame personality flaws, weak character, or excessive sentimentality, anything except the medicine. Inside a residential parlour, you overhear a family talking in hushed voices about a neighbour who fell into vice. They whisper as though discussing a ghost sighting. When you glance at their sideboard, you spot a half-empty bottle of laudanum next to the biscuits. This is Victorian hypocrisy at its peak. Addiction is shameful only when someone else has it. Even the language reflects the divide. Wealthy morphine users are said to be ailing, delicate, or overwrought. Poor or immigrant users are described as corrupt, dangerous, or immoral. The drug is the same. The stereotypes are not. The panic is less about safety and more about social boundaries. Who deserves compassion and who deserves condemnation? As you walk back onto the street, the contradictions swirl like fog around gas lamps. Panic about drugs has transformed into panic about people, creating policies built on fear instead of understanding. And in the centre of that chaos lies the same truth. No one has yet learned how to talk about addiction without blaming the wrong things, the wrong places, and the wrong people. You awaken in a crisp white ward that smells like antiseptic and quiet desperation. Nurses march like they've won medals for sternness, and morphine is no longer lying casually on nightstands. It's locked behind a cabinet with more keys than a medieval castle. Scientists scurry by with clipboards, muttering about dosage control and patient monitoring, concepts that would have made a Victorian doctor burst into tears. Medicine is finally learning that morphine is powerful, and sometimes too powerful, even if half the doctors still smoke inside. The room is orderly to the point of intimidation. Sunlight streams in through tall windows, reflecting off metal bed frames polished so aggressively you can see your own horrified expression in them. Each patient lies tucked beneath immaculate white sheets, arms neatly at their sides, like they're auditioning for a brochure titled The Future of Medical Compliance. A nurse glides past your bed, a human embodiment of discipline, with a clipboard in one hand and the gaze of someone who can detect rule-breaking through walls. She checks your pulse with clinical efficiency, writes down a number, nods once, and moves along. You know instinctively that this is a woman who would not hesitate to confiscate contraband knitting needles. Behind her comes a young intern pushing a metal cart stocked with labelled bottles, syringes, and enough paperwork to crush a small pony. He approaches the locked narcotics cabinet, stops, takes a deep breath, and retrieves no fewer than 3 keys, one from his pocket, one from a chain around his neck, and one he reluctantly borrows from the head nurse, who eyes him like a hawk supervising a toddler with scissors. When he finally opens the cabinet, you half expect a heavenly chorus. Inside sits morphine, tightly controlled, counted meticulously, and stored in neat rows. The intern extracts exactly 1 dose, holds it at eye level like a jeweller inspecting a diamond, and then signs a logbook with a flourish of almost theatrical caution. It's a far cry from the Victorian approach of take as needed, or drink until your feelings stop. Now, every drop is documented. Every dose has a purpose. The hospital has adopted what it calls scientific pain management, which essentially means we're desperately trying not to repeat the last 100 years. A doctor breezes in wearing a crisp coat, and the confident swagger of someone who thinks washing hands before surgery is a radical gesture of progress. He explains your chart in clipped academic tones, the schedule for medication, the plan for monitoring, the expected range of side effects. He uses phrases like careful titration and clinical oversight. Somewhere, a 19th century pharmacist faints from the shock. You overhear scientists in the hallway debating the future of analgesics. We must understand the neurochemical pathways, one insists, nearly dropping his clipboard in enthusiasm. Regulation is essential. Another adds, morphine is a marvel, but also a menace. They walk briskly toward a room filled with chalkboards, diagrams, and at least 14 unanswered questions. Meanwhile, the ward's patients experience the new era of controlled pain relief firsthand. The woman in the next bed, recovering from surgery, receives her morphine injection only after the nurse double-checks her bracelet, the chart, and the intern's signature. She relaxes, grateful for the relief, but the dosing is measured, timed with a precision that Victorian households would have found deeply upsetting. A man across the room asks for a little extra to help me sleep. The nurse gives him a look that could extinguish candles. Absolutely not. He apologizes immediately and pretends he didn't say anything. Even with all these precautions, whispers circulate among the staff. Stories of patients who develop dependency even under careful care. Cases where dosage had to be tapered painstakingly. Situations where pain management became a balancing act between humane relief and dangerous overuse. It's not perfect. It's not foolproof. But it's the first earnest attempt at treating morphine with the respect and fear it deserves. At evening rounds, the lights dim and the ward settles into a polite hush. Nurses make final checks. Doctors disappear to smoke in hallways like rebellious teenagers. The narcotics cabinet clicks shut, locked securely for the night. And as you lie there beneath the crisp sheets, listening to the soft shuffle of medical progress, you realize you've entered a turning point. Medicine is evolving, slowly, awkwardly, imperfectly. But finally, after centuries of chaos, morphine has boundaries, supervision, and a line of stern nurses prepared to guard it like treasure. So tonight, as you settle into your clean bed, without morphine syringes tucked in the nightstand, without laudanum bottles labelled for general cheerfulness, and without a doctor insisting that opiates will fix everything except your taxes, just take a quiet moment to appreciate how far we've come. You've wandered through centuries where morphine healed, harmed, soothed, destroyed, comforted, complicated, and confused nearly everyone who crossed its path. You've watched soldiers cling to it, Victorian mothers sip it, scientists celebrate it, governments panic over it, and entire generations learn the hard way that miracle cures usually come with fine print. And yet, woven through all the chaos is something strangely human, a reminder that people have always been trying their very best with the knowledge they have, even when that knowledge is spectacularly wrong. They were scared, hopeful, hurting, stubborn, brave, confused, just like we are. They wanted relief. They wanted comfort. They wanted a little peace at the end of a long day. Tonight, maybe whisper a tiny thank you to the people who lived through the messier parts of medical history, the patients who trusted, the doctors who experimented, the families who endured, and the reformers who fought for safer treatments. They helped pull humanity forward, one mistake, one discovery, one overdue realization at a time, because history isn't just triumphs or tragedies. It's a long, winding effort to try again, to do better, to learn. And Morphine's story, complicated, painful, deeply human, is a reminder that progress is never perfect, but it is possible. So as you drift off tonight, wrapped in soft blankets, with clean water nearby, safe medicine on the shelves, and no Victorian soothing syrup lurking in your pantry, breathe deeply. Let the tension go. Let the day soften around you. You're warm. You're safe. You're here in a world that, despite everything, keeps trying. Sleep well, friend.